Robert McKeon, thank you for hosting us.
Well, Pat, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. If you don't know me, I am Robert McKeon. I'm the town supervisor here in the town of Red Hook. We are very excited to have all of you here today and to be working with you, we hope, on this initiative. We proudly report that the town of Red Hook was only the 4th township in New York State to be designated a clean energy community. We have conducted many projects, and we are in the middle of many others, whether it's a municipal solar farm project or retrofitting this very outdated building so that it's energy efficient. This is another great project. It's not often as a local elected official that you have the opportunity to do the right thing by lowering emissions and also lowering people's taxes. And this is what they call low-hanging fruit or no-brainer, whatever your favorite phrase is. But the difficulty with this type of initiative, like with all others, is that it requires a bit of education. And so we're really grateful to NYSERDA in New York State for sort of leading the effort in ensuring that municipalities have the type of expertise available to them to make these efforts achievable and certainly as pain-free as possible. So to that end, we're very happy to have Pat Courtney, who we've worked with now for maybe just a few years on a lot of projects together, right, Pat?
A few.
Very good. So I will, without further ado, introduce Pat, and she will take it from there. And thank you all again for coming.
Thank you, Robert. Really terrific to be here. All right, folks, you know, I'm going to be addressing you, but we also have a webinar going on, so I have to just make sure that they can see what's happening. We are going to get started, of course, immediately, but I need to tell the folks in webinar land what to do with their questions and things of that nature. So if you will just bear with me, and then I'll introduce the various members of the consortium that are going to be speaking today. So I am Pat Courtney Strong, and I'm an independent contractor to the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority under NYSERDA's umbrella. My company and the 3 others that are here today, my partners, formed the Mid-Hudson Streetlight Consortium a little over a year ago to help cities, towns, and villages convert to money-saving LED streetlights. And we're here today with our hosts at Red Hook and representatives of about 8 munis. You know, it looks like we're a small crowd, but if you have the right people in the room, that's all that matters. So we were delighted to see that about 8 municipalities are here today. And of course, what we're going to be figuring out is how you can move forward with this tremendous opportunity for money and energy-saving LED streetlights. Here's those housekeeping things I'm going to share with the folks who couldn't join us in person today. So we're keeping all of you on mute, but you can communicate with us through the chat feature of WebEx. If you're signed in through your computer, there's a toolbar that becomes visible at the top of your screen. And when you put your cursor there. On the toolbar, the chat icon is to the right, and you can communicate with us privately or publicly using that. There's a drop-down menu where you can speak to us either way. And this is how you should submit questions for the speakers to us. It may seem a bit convoluted, but if you've ever been to a webinar where everyone could speak at once, you'll know why we do this. We will be taking questions at the end and as we move through the afternoon as appropriate. You can also text questions to us. I'm going to give you Melissa at Audit's number for texting, or in the event of a real problem, you can call her. She's at 914-329. Excuse me, I have this available here. She's at 914-329-7917. You could also email questions or concerns to pat@courtneystrong.com. We'll do our best to get in as many questions as possible. I'm sure you know that things can happen during a webinar, so if you were to get disconnected for any reason, just log back in. If you notice audio or visual issues on our end, feel free to use the chat box or email us to let us know what you're experiencing. If for any reason you lose a computer connection, just dial in by phone at the number provided in your confirmation email. There's a questionnaire at the end of the webinar. We're asking you to hang in for a very long time today, but when you disconnect, whenever that will be, during the 4 hours, you'll see the questionnaire. So that would help us if you fill it out. And now I would like to just switch over to telling you a little bit about today's speakers. George Woodbury will be up and back a few times to the podium today. He's with LightSmart Consulting. I see we're having a little difficulty with our slides here, but I'm just going to assume.
No, it's just because the big screen just came up.
Okay. All right, back to where we are. We're also videotaping today's event, and we will be getting the videotape sent to everybody who registered. George Woodbury is with LightSmart Consulting. Many of you have tuned into our webinars before, so I'm just going to breeze through his extensive bio, but he is one of the nation's leading consultants for municipalities nationwide on street lighting tariffs, LED technology, gas and electricity procurement, project planning and management. He's frequently called on to serve as an expert witness on street lighting tariff matters before utility commissions. He's completed projects in 13 states and worked on street lighting legislative matters in 6 states. These include his services. He provides turnkey services to communities, which include project design, writing procurement documents, overseeing contractor selection, and the like. George is most proud of the fact that he's a former Municipal Department of Public Works chief and a graduate of West Point, which he likes to tell us is right down the road, no matter where he is in the Hudson Valley. It's right down the road. George will be supported today, as always, by Nina Orville of Abundant Efficiency and Jen Metzger. So just briefly, Nina's in the front row, as is Jen Metzger, and Nina is president of Abundant Efficiency, a consulting firm that creates and implements innovative solutions to environmental and business challenges for local governments, corporations, and nonprofits. She specializes in multi-party private-public initiatives that generate environmental and economic benefits. There's so much more to be said about you, but I'm just going to go on to Jen, if I may. Oh dear, I'm sorry, Jen. We're going to have to hold on for a second. I think most people know Jen best of all. She is the founding director of Citizens for Local Action. She is I'm sorry, Power, which is a really important distinction. She is a Town of Rosendale councilwoman. She's the former chair of the Rosendale Environmental Commission. And importantly to this effort, she is the principal author of the street light analysis, LED analysis that we've all been working on for over a year, which confirmed a lot of our initial thoughts and the thoughts of many people in this room about the overwhelming benefits, up to 65% cost savings that are possible through municipal purchase of LED streetlights. So welcome, Jen. Thank you for being here. All right, so moving on, just to say very quickly, I think we do have a couple people on the phone or through the webinar who may not have joined us before. So the principal deliverables of the Mid-Hudson Streetlight Consortium are that we did a survey of Mid-Hudson communities to see where people were and are with looking into this issue. We formed the Mid-Hudson Consortium of communities interested in streetlight conversion. We have over 24 active members. The assessment led by Jen Metzger. The people in the room have trouble reading the title because we've got other things going on the screen, so I'm just going to move that. LED streetlight conversion in New York, a common sense guide for local governments in the Mid-Hudson region. We formed a steering committee of active communities that want to work on this. And then we're up to today's activity, which is over the last weeks and months, we've put together the beginnings of a procurement aggregation. The document has been emailed to you. We have copies up here for you to look at, and it's posted on our website. So we're at that stage in our work, and that's the business of today, is to go over why it's important to kick off this effort with a field inventory, and then we're going to segue into what you would do to proceed with us in the procurement aggregation. And just for a minute before we start, I want to welcome some folks who are in the back, the Clean Energy Community Coordinators. If you want to just say hi to everybody. I particularly want to note Carla Castillo and Robin Reynolds. We have done an event like this just in the last month or so in Plattsburgh, and we had a terrific turnout of supervisors there. I also work for the Capital Region Regional Planning Commission with Robin to get this message out to a wider audience. And Carla Castillo is with the Hudson Valley Regional Council. So the key thing about them joining us today is that they are our force magnifiers, or whatever that term could be, to help all of us. I'm sorry, and I didn't see Nicholas Moran. We weren't sure you were going to come. Get that hand up there. Nicholas is also with Hudson Valley Regional Council, and the three of them are very interested in this topic, but more important to you, they're available to help you parse this topic and to move forward in addition to us. All right. Okay, so thanks to my friend Denny Calais, who is in the room representing Red Hook as a volunteer, as well as our supervisor from Red Hook. Denny suggested that if you all are like him, there's a number of questions you want answered today. And so we looked into our archives of what we've been fielding from many of you over the months since we got started, and we thought that these were the principal topics that you have on your mind. You'll set me straight if I'm wrong, and you'll tell us if there's others. But I'm not going to go through every one of them here, but you could just tick them off as you see them on the screen. We know that you need answers. We know that you need specificity, and so a lot of what we're doing here today is to try to get you to that point. There may well be other questions, but those are the key ones. I think it's a good time to turn this over to George. Now, I'm going to get back to my slides in a moment here, but we have George coming online.
So while she's doing that, my purpose here today is not to entertain you. It's to train you. So this is designed as a training session for people that are going to actually go out and do this work and do the design. So if you didn't bring a notepad to take notes, you're going to have a hard time. We will be available, of course, later today to answer individual questions, and then we will also be available via the phone and other means to help you. But hopefully, there you go. Hopefully, we can limit that as much as possible. So, how are we going to change the?
I'm going to do it. Yeah, if you just want to say, go ahead.
Okay. So the question is, how do you get from where you are right now with your existing system to a final completed project? And what are the steps that you as a community have to do in order to get there? And we're going to talk about predominantly two things. We're going to talk about the audit of figuring out what your system looks like now, and then how you take that audit and convert it into a street lighting design, and then select the fixtures that you want to install and how you want the system to look when you're finished. That then allows you to do the procurements that are necessary to procure the materials and the services you need to do the project. So that's what we're going to talk about next item. And so why do you do an audit? There's two very important reasons why you do an audit. First is you want to verify the inventory. Is it correct? I've done hundreds of audits, and I will tell you, typically I find there's a 5 to 7% error at least, sometimes more. Sometimes that error is in your favor and the utility's been overcharging you. So you need to know that so that you can go to them and get adjustments to your bill. If you own the lights, it's too late. It becomes your problem and they're not going to be sympathetic to refunding money. The second reason why you're out there is to collect information you will need in order to do the design, to select the right fixtures to put in each location. Next slide. So this is a list of the kinds of things that you want to collect. Now what I have here in front of me is my field audit kit. Most importantly is a clipboard. You're going to need to take, you're going to get an inventory from the utility, and I think we have some copies.
Yes, well,
Hopefully people have been distributed.
so this is the Red Hook one, but everyone was emailed the one that was prepared to a lesser extent.
So what you're going to want to do is assign a number to each line in your inventory. So, for example, the first one on your inventory might be Allen Street, pole number 3. You're going to put that as item number 1, and make sure you number them from top to bottom. That way,
If I
when
could
you...
just ask a question, do we think this is a good time to hand out the Red Hook inventory?
you okay.
Oh, so, here we go.
You have copies for everybody?
I do. As long as there's not more than
I tried.
25 people. Yep. You have one. I don't know.
I can give up mine. Somebody didn't want to do mine?
I do not, no.
The first page under the cover is just a summary. It's a summary of the lights that are in the town and the wattages.
I thought I'd share with you.
If you look at the next page, this is the part, and this is what you're going to be taking in the field with you, is the list by street of every light.
Anyone? Missing?
All right, go to page 5. It has account number on the left-hand column, and then it says pole number, lamp type, wattage, lumens, street name, latitude, and longitude. You won't get latitude and longitude, most likely. You're going to have to go out and get that. So you find that page?
These are not numbered. What is the top line
They are
saying?
Top line says account number, pole number, lamp type, wattage, lumens, street name, latitude, and longitude.
Okay.
It's the 6th page in the package.
Right.
I think they're numbered with my little handwritten.
No.
I think it's stapled.
Oh, yeah, well,
Oh,
see, that's a
stapled.
1 down there. It got stapled, you're right.
Okay.
Sorry.
So this is the list, it's by street and pole number, where you want to assign a number to each entry.
Thank you.
Because when you're making notes, there may not be room on this paper to get your notes. So you're going to put 1 and then make your notes. And then you know later that that refers to line 1 of that particular pole, okay? Now, the second thing you're going to need is a way to take measurements, because you're going to want to know how far apart the poles are, how wide the road is, how high the light is off the street, and so on and so forth. We started out originally with one of these laser pointers. The problem with this is when you get very far away, you can't see the dot anymore. So then I put a $15 BB gun scope and epoxied it onto the top of this thing so that when the crosshairs of the scope were on the target, I could actually see the dot. But even that wasn't very satisfactory. If you're too far away, a telephone pole was 150 feet away, it doesn't come back reliably, so unless you have a reflector. So then you had to go down there and put a reflector on the other pole, come back, take the measurement, and it's just too time consuming. We discovered these golf rangefinders that measure distance in yards. This is the Simmons 600V. It cost $84. It's worth every penny. Very fast, very easy to use, and it's pretty accurate. You just aim it at the object, push the button, and it displays in the bottom how many yards away it is. You can do the ×3 in your head, and you're good to go. In terms of getting the GPS location, there are two approaches. The complex approach is an iPad where you download onto it ArcGIS Collector. It's an app that's free. And what that does is it allows you to go out and capture information. The other way to do it is with a recreational GPS device. This happens to be a Magellan Gold 300. The nice thing about this device is it'll record up to 500 waypoints. And so when you go to a thing and you want to save that point, you just tell it to save. It tells you what the number was. It's waypoint 6, line 3, waypoint 6, or line 6, waypoint 6. And then later when you go home, you can hook this up to your computer and download it. And then as long as you number each of these points over here, you can then easily match them up using Excel.
Excuse me, could you just tell me what the name of the app was that you said to download?
ArcView Collector. Yeah, it's ArcGIS is the website, and it's called Collector. Now, we will help you with this because we're training some local folks. And we have actually provided, I have 50 ArcGIS licenses. And what I've done is I have built drop-down menus. So that when you're out there, you click on your location, and then there's a drop-down menu. You can pick the wattage of the lamp, you can pick all of the information and the points without having to enter notes. That's the drawback to this, is trying to type in the notes. We're doing it this way. I think if I had to start without my drop-down menus, I'd rather do it with the paper.
Could I just interject one thing? Our
Please.
next speaker is going to, from the town of Marbletown, Tom Conrad, is going to have all these words that George used up on the screen, and it's also available on our website. Exactly what he's talking about.
So, the other thing I like.
One more question, George?
One more comment. The handheld model, I'm with the town of Red Hook, and the Dutchess County Cornell Cooperative Extension was willing to let us borrow their handheld GPS unit. And I don't know if that's for other people in other counties, if they have that resource as well, but that was free of charge from,
This was about $300.
Yeah.
It's not a big expense. As I said, this is $84. If
That's
you-
great.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
a free thing, and they're gonna help us map it and
Right.
download the points.
That's an important resource.
So, and like I said, we're going to be training some local folks that can also help, and we'll also be available to help to the extent possible on doing this. We go to the next one.
So is this a complete audit then, this Red Hook example?
Yes.
Because it doesn't have the pole spacing then?
No, doesn't have the completed audit. This is what you're starting with.
Okay, so this is
So
just
we're
a
talking
spreadsheet
you,
from Central Hudson?
we're talking you through the
No.
process. So this is
Looks
what a
like it.
sample inventory looks like.
It starts with, yes.
Okay, and this, you get this in an Excel format. If you don't, you're gonna have to convert it to an Excel format. And then what you do is you just start up here and you list 1, 2, number each one of those. Okay, next one.
Sure.
The next thing I do, how many of you all know how to use pivot tables? Wow, okay. Excel is amazing in that you can do a pivot table, which allows you to select what it is you want to do a pivot table with, and then it comes up and it says, okay, what do you want to do with this table? And you can drag and drop the information. So what I do is I take the street name and I list it down on the left. And then across the top, I list the different descriptions of the equipment. And then underneath that, I do the counts. And I can show you all how to do that later if you're interested.
Yeah.
And for the municipalities that are participating in this,
We're
they
doing
will
it
be
for 'em.
provided a workbook that will include the pivot tables and this functionality that George is talking about, which you can see in the Red Hook
So-
handout. You'll all receive that.
It doesn't work too well on
It
the
doesn't.
screen.
That's all right. So what I've done here then, I know, for example, in this case, this was out of the town of Westerly. Merrimack is a major arterial. Mosley is a major arterial. So what I did was I color those differently. Because what I want to look at is how are my lights distributed across the town? This is part of the design consideration. Lights, nobody designed a lighting system for your town. The lights got put where the pole was. The pole got put there because that's how far the wires could stretch without sagging below 15 feet. It has nothing to do with lighting design. And somebody said, well, we'll put a light up there. So, and then you have this problem with the 81-year-old woman who called her councilman and said, I'm afraid at night it's too dark and I want a brighter light in front of my house. And lo and behold, they put up a 250-watt light in front of her house. Everybody else on the street has a 70-watt light, but that 250 is there. Oh, by the way, she died 4 years ago, and she's in the cemetery, and there's another family living in that house, but that 250-watt light is still there today. So what I'm looking at is how are the lights distributed? And if you look at Monroe here, so I've got 4 50-watt lights on Monroe and 3 100-watt lights on Monroe. All right, put on your DPW hat. A light's out on Monroe. Okay, I gotta know which one it is because they're different. If you look at the IESNA guidelines for roadway lighting, generally they say if it's this type of roadway, this amount of pedestrian activity, this is the light level they recommend. So in theory, if it's a residential street, all the lights should be the same on that street unless there's an unusual condition. That's the other part of the audit process, is to look for those unusual conditions. And I have a list of some of the things that you might look for. But what I want to do is I want to pay particular attention to those areas where I've got these oddball lights in the middle of another light. Because at the end of the day, ideally what I'd like to do is keep it pretty simple.
Do those recommended lighting levels take into account if there's sidewalks or no sidewalks on a street, so if pedestrians are walking in the street
If you're
rather
the
than
question,
walking?
George.
So the question is whether or not the recommended lighting levels take into account whether there's sidewalks or not sidewalks and that sort of thing. They don't. They have separate guidelines for pedestrian activity, pedestrian areas, and the nature of the pedestrian area, but it's very difficult. It gets very complex when you try to figure all of that out. And some of that's just common sense. For me, street lighting is kind of a come-as-you-are party. You have what you have. Are you happy with it? Are people complaining it's not right or it needs to be fixed? If they're reasonably happy with it, then what we want to do is make it as good or better than it is now. And so to do that, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to look at these kinds of situations. I'm going to make sure that in my major roads, for example, Merrimack being a major road, if I'm going to choose between a 50 and a 100, I'm going to choose the 100 as my consistent light for that roadway. Okay? So that's what the value of setting this up is. Now, next slide. The other thing I do is I'll group my columns. And this is how you, by the way, when you're out doing an audit, and you're looking up to see what the light is, and I'll show you a couple more examples of this. Can you see that 17 that's there? It's on a blue sticker. Blue means it's mercury vapor. Yellow means it's high pressure sodium, red is metal halide, and white is LED or induction, one of the two. And then these are the numbers that will appear. It's 1/10 of the estimated wattage of the fixture. So if
Except
it's-
for LEDs, which are 100%.
LEDs are 100%, correct. So if it's a 40 number up there, it's a 400 watt fixture. Okay? Next slide. The other thing we run into is when people are out doing audits and they use different annotations for how they record information, it gets really complicated when I'm trying to sort through and sort a Excel file. So what we did was we said, let's come up with some standards that we'll always use. Always do it the same way. That'll make it much easier on the back end. So these are standard abbreviations that we came up with to use, and you may add to this. But it's important to have a standard abbreviation so that if you want to sort through your list and say, how many bent mast arms do I have, you have a way to do that without having to read every note that every auditor made. Okay? Next slide. This is a
400 watt HPS.
400 watt high pressure sodium. Okay? Now, I'll show you. If you look at this closely in here, and I'll show you an example of this in a minute. Next slide. What do you think that is?
Oh, that's the metal halide. Yeah, metal halide.
250 watt metal halide. Now it's unusual that they have a red over white. This is the first time I've seen that. This was in my hometown in North Carolina. Notice this. Go to the next slide. And there's your mercury vapor. I mean your LED. See the white background with the 150. The ANSI group has decided they're going to round these to the nearest 10 watts. That's how they're going to do it. That's problematic, but that's what they've decided. Next slide.
I just want to have you answer again a question, but I think it's been answered for Jeff Allison. In the workbook, the numbers in red are the high traffic streets?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Those are
very
your
good.
arterials, and you can use different colors for collector, arterial, or major commercial, however you want to do that.
Right.
Okay?
Mhm.
How many of y'all recognize this? This is what they call an admiral's hat, and it's an incandescent. They were put up in the 20s. It was our first attempt to manage light trespass. It's designed to block the light from the second story windows in front of the light and behind the light, but to keep it open up and down the street to direct most of the light up and down the street. My town in Lexington, where I was a DPW, we had a third of our lights were this or what they call a radio wave, which looks like a piece of bent corrugated sheet metal in a circle with a LED, incandescent light underneath. Next slide. This fixture on the left is what's called a NEMA enclosure, or I call it a barn light. Obviously, that's going to put out a nice circular pattern of light. These next two pictures just show you some conditions, because one of the things you have to guard against is when people are up working on the lights, there may be a dangerous condition, and that exists when the light is too close to high voltage lines. Typically, it should be more than 5 feet. If it's closer than 5 feet, then the certifications of the people doing the work go up dramatically. You may, in some utilities, require you to wrap the utility lines
5 feet as measured from where to where?
from the light to the wire.
The fixture or the base of the armature?
No, the fixture itself, where the guy's actually doing the work.
Okay.
Okay. But what you want to do is, and it's fairly rare, but occasionally you'll see a situation where you just want to let the utility lineman come in and deal with it, or you want to take the light and move it to a different location, just so you're not having to deal with that safety concern. But these are some of the things you're going to pick up. Okay? And in this case, what's going on here, as you can see, This is broken down here at the base where the wire goes up into the mast arm. That's broken. And this wire has been twisted together. It doesn't show real well in that picture, but you want to pick up on some of these kinds of conditions.
When we measure the fixture to the wire, are we using the same device? Are we using the Simmons?
When you say measure the fixture to the wire, what do you mean?
Well,
The-
you said
the
the
length
5
of the mast arm?
Sorry, yes, the light. I mean, we said it has to be within 5 feet.
You're going to make a mental judgment. You can tell this is 6 feet.
Okay, so we're just estimating it. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
I don't know if y'all know this, but tip to tip of your fingers is your height.
Mhm.
Okay, next slide. This is in your town.
No, that's in Dobbs Ferry.
Oh, it's Dobbs Ferry, you're right.
I know every inch of my town.
This is a Dobbs Ferry, and I was trying to figure out what that light was, so I used Google Earth Street View to do a lot of my survey work, but I found this one. You want to note this kind of stuff. Do you know why these poles rot at the bottom?
Improperly grounded.
Guess where the snow sits all, guess where the snow that has the salt from the roadway sits all winter? So you'll see typically these cast iron and metal poles that are on the side of the road, they'll rot at the bottom, and that's why. It's because of the salt. Now, this Dobbs Ferry, this, right down the street from this, there was an LED. And then just beyond that, there was a Cobra head, standard Cobra head. Next, okay, and the pole marking, if it's there, is typically 5 feet above the ground, and that's a typical marking. One of the problems you're going to run into, at least I saw in Kingston, is that there doesn't seem to be any logic to the pole numbering. In other parts of New England, the numbers are absolutely logical. They assign a route number to each street. So Elm Street, every pole on Elm Street is going to start with its route number, 274, if that's the number assigned. And then the poles are numbered in sequence from one end to the other. So 274-1, -2, -3. So if a pole has no number on it, well, if you can see the number on that side and the number on that side, you know what this one's supposed to be. In Kingston, no, Ulster, we audited Ulster. There's a pole we can't find, and we have no idea where to look.
Our supervisor's right there in church.
Don't ask me where it is. I haven't found it.
I looked and looked and looked. I couldn't find it. It's on their bill. They're being charged for it, but I never could find it. I drove all around and I looked at all the, because it was on the list in proximity to some others. I figured, well, it must be in that general area, but can't find it. Anyway, next one. Next slide. This is an unusual situation which you also want to look for. See the street light up here? There's actually another one right there. Is it the town's responsibility to illuminate a church? If those are on your bill, maybe they shouldn't be. You can leave them on your bill, but then it's time to go sit down with the church and say, by the way, we're paying for those lights. Here's what you're going to pay us every month to reimburse the town. Otherwise, we're going to have them removed. Okay? This is a town decision. But you will find this. You'll find businesses where a floodlight's been put up that happens to be aiming at their parking lot, but it's on the municipal pole and it's on the municipal bill. So identify those kinds of things when you're out doing your audit. Next slide. There was a question over here.
Yes, I just want to, if you have, your lights are metered, that, in other words, that they have an individual read from those particular lights, as opposed to our lights with NICEAG, it's all estimated. So they just count the number of lights. How would we figure out how that is being?
So the question has to do with metered lights versus unmetered lights. The unmetered lights are generally, well, I can't say always, but they're typically overhead fed. In that particular case, in that picture, those were overhead fed and connected to the secondary. they were not being fed from the church. So there was no wire coming from the church to the pole to feed that light so that I knew that it would be on the church's meter. It was being fed from the street. And that's the kind of what you have to look for. With underground lights, it's a little more difficult to sort out. One of the things I have in my kit bag is this. It's a set of binoculars. Now these happen to be up to 24 power, so they're pretty strong. Almost always when you see a lamp that is frosted like this, it's a mercury vapor. And the reason for that is that mercury vapor lights have a color rendering index of about 20, unless they're frosted like that, and then it helps raise their color rendering index up to about 45. So this was one of the, and the other problem is mercury vapor can put a hazardous ultraviolet light bad for your eyes, so they typically frosted them. Now, this is what a mercury vapor light looks like without the frosting. Now, this is a high pressure sodium. You notice this arc tube is about the size of a pencil. And the length of the arc tube determines the wattage of the fixture. So a 50 watt is about 2 inches long. And a 70 watt is about 2.5 inches long. And then, you know, they get longer. You get into the 250s and 400s, they're like this. So if you got a set of binoculars and you can actually see the lamp, you can look in there and tell what it is, if it's not marked. You'll notice this one and this one both have a little white paint, and sometimes it's black. Those are both metal halides. And the metal halide and the mercury vapor all have the arc tube that looks like a piece of glass that's been pinched at either end, whereas the high pressure sodium has that tube, that rod in there that's about the size of a pencil. So if you can see the bulb, you can determine if there's no tag there, that at least you know what it is. What do you do if you go out there and you can't see anything to help you and there's no tag on the light?
You say no tag. Take as good a photo as you can.
You take a note and you assume that the utility is correct. Whatever they have in the inventory, you assume that's what's there. You don't have any other choice, short of getting up there in a bucket and checking it.
I have a question. Is there any problem related to this with security lights that we see on farms and sometimes there's a pole out to a farm or on a...
Usually that's being paid for by the resident.
Repeat the question.
The question is about area lights that are on private property. Again, remember I said you're going to go out with that inventory. If it's not on the inventory and you see it, and it's not on the street, obviously it's not part of the town's bill and you're not worried about it. So don't add it. If you want to, you can make a note someplace and somebody can go look at it if you want. But your number one priority is to validate the inventory you've been given by the utility. That's your first step. I've had auditors who go out with this thing and they capture every light that's out there, and then I'm faced with the business of trying to figure out, well, how does this compare to this? And it should be the other way around. They should be correcting this as they go and capturing the information on here. So, priority straight. All right, next slide, please. This is what's called a handhold cover, the bottom of your metal poles. And in the case of the one in Dobbs Ferry, it was actually, the handhold in that case was just a sectional piece of the base and it was missing. But this is a handhold cover. This is a foundation here. Some of them are direct buried, so they don't have that foundation. You don't see the bolts. So that's how you tell if they're direct buried. This happened to be in a parking lot. Next slide.
George, what does that mean, direct bearing, or?
The pole, they just drill a hole in the ground, stick the pole right in the hole, and the wires come underground and come up inside the pole. That's a direct buried pole. I see a lot of those are in neighborhoods. You'll see the colonial style fixture on the side of the road, and they're fiberglass base, and they're typically direct buried, and the feeder wires for are also direct buried. So that's the kind of stuff you're looking for the audit. And then if you really want to get into doing photometrics, that's what this is for. And that's what this is for. Now this is a Minolta T10. It's about $1,000. It has the ability, I can hook it up to my laptop, put it out in front of my car and drive down the road, and it'll take pictures take a reading every so often and then download it onto my computer. But there are also companies that have developed sophisticated systems where they can drive your streets and measure all the foot candles on every street if you want to pay for that. Usually the only time I do this is if somebody wants me to verify that we're going to meet certain requirements, and then I do samples. I don't try to do every light, I just do sample areas. Any more questions? So the next thing we're going to do when I come back up is do design, how you now take this information and do a design.
So
We had a question?
importantly, no, we have Tom coming on.
Okay.
Next. So importantly, our next speaker, Tom Conrad, come on up, Tom, is someone who's actually done this in his own town. And I'm sorry, I forgot to ask you for your full bio, but I know from being a fan of Tom Conrad that he has a sustainable investments practice in Marbletown. And he is one of the most active volunteers in the environmental sphere in the town. And he's been a steadfast friend of the consortium since we hit the tarmac. All right, let me get your slides going. Meanwhile, you can get started there.
Well, I'd like to say, if you're a little intimidated by all the information George just gave you, it is doable. I mean, I think that's my main message. And actually having that presentation would have made it a lot more doable than it was when I did it or when Jen did it before me. Especially some of the things like light identification, things like that. I also, George and I were thinking similarly, here's my kit, and mine's cheaper, except for this, which you don't actually have to need. I actually put my telephoto lens on this, and it is so nice. When I want to get a pole, I take a photo of the pole number, put on my telephoto, take a photo of the pole, and anything else I want to take a photo of, download all those. The order there in the camera tells me exactly which pole I was looking at. And I can, if I want to see some detail on the light, I wasn't quite sure if it was an HPS or mercury vapor, because this is a really good camera and I had a telephoto on it, I can just, or I could email the photo to George and he could tell me what it was if I didn't know. So this is a nice thing, but this is also on the order of expenses this time. So that's probably not. But the tablet part, if any of you have a smartphone, it'll do everything that he needs in terms of getting the so smartphone, which you already have, or at least somebody in town already has, you can get your GPS coordinates. He used a hiking nav system. Car nav system works too, exact same way. Waypoints, put them in. The way, instead of numbers, the way he says 1, 2, 3, I would just always use the pole number to reference it, but I think, so you didn't actually have to reference, well, which one was 1, which one was 2? Pole number's right there. I label my waypoint with the pole number because I'm standing right by the pole when I'm doing it. You have a question, Jen?
Yeah, could you guys just define what a waypoint is?
Oh, okay, so a waypoint is when you have your little nav system going in here, you say, save this point, save this location. And when nav systems, when you're saving a location on a nav system, it asks you to name it, and it already downloads the GPS coordinates. And I can do that on my smartphone too. Like if I'm in Google Maps and I have a connection, I save that location in Google Maps. even if probably ArcGIS collector would work better, which you would do too if you ever connected to a tech. We didn't. One of the things I didn't have that will make your job easier is licenses on ArcGIS. You need to have an overall license to make that ArcGIS collector work well. But that was my
Operative word there is work well.
yeah.
So
Work well.
it will work poorly without a license?
It'll work without a license, but we found in terms of what we want to do, it's so much easier if we have a license and then we can modify it and do the kinds of things we want. And we're more than willing to share that with you
Tom, would
all.
you repeat that question?
Yeah. So the question was the difference between the ArcGIS collector working well or just working. And working well allows you to collect the exact data that you want for the spreadsheet. So the ArcGIS collector prompts the volunteer or the auditor for that data. While if I'm just using my smartphone and I'm recording a location and a poll number, I have to remember to put that in, or I'll go back to the 5 photos I took with this when I'm on my computer. So there are a lot of ways to do this. Okay, so this is a little bit out of date, but so this is what we did. We only had 80 likes, so it was a little less daunting than what you're looking at. Now, by the way, we have 60 likes, which I'd say is one of the best results of our audit. We still haven't converted, but because we're seeing if we can get another 5 or 6 gotten rid of before we buy them out. But yeah, mostly it took us 3 weeks or so. I just had volunteers do the lights near them. And I'm not sure what my other volunteers use, but I use that GPS nav system. You have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on one point you were just saying about taking lights out of commission as part of your audit. It's a great thing to do. We took 10% of our lights out of commission, but it's different in different service territories, like when to actually do that. In Central Hudson territory, they don't charge you for taking the lights, decommissioning them, so it's good to do it before you buy the lights. But I think it was in NYSEG. It's not the same in other utility territories. You have to check the tariff because you'll end up having to
Pay more.
pay for them to take it off and pay the net book value.
So
Yeah.
I'm just gonna recap that because they just can't hear you.
Yeah,
So
sure.
So Jen Metzger was just giving advice about decommissioning lights before you purchase them from the utility. But it does vary by utility how that will be treated.
Let's go on to the next slide. So it's a doable, but I think you need to allocate 10 or 20 minutes of volunteer time per light for your whole audit. If you're doing it yourself, it's supposed to be probably.
And that's because you're including travel time, or because some lights will be much more complex to look at? Because if you're taking photos, then it sounds like that should reduce a lot of the time.
The ideal light, I think, I could definitely do a light that I find immediately in 5 minutes, get everything input. But then there's that light, the poll number, which you can't find, which took 2 hours.
Okay.
And then there's the light that isn't exactly where you thought it was. There's the light that doesn't match the inventory. So yeah, it's not consistent. If everything's good, yeah, 5 minutes. But it's not. But the non-good ones are the ones where you get a lot of money back from Central Hudson. So it's worth it. Yeah, it's good. So as George was saying, there are definitely problems with the utilities inventory you get. And these are what makes the audit take forever, and they are also what get you a lot of money back. In Marble Towns, we had 80 lights actually there were 84 on the inventory. The 80 is the number that were actually ours. We had one light that absolutely just did not exist ever. Said it was on Canal Road. There are no lights on Canal Road anywhere near this. The pole number could not be found. We checked all the poles in that area. did not be found. We had 2 lights that were private lights illuminating parking lots, like he talked about with that. That's not the picture of the church parking lot. In our case, Central Hudson told us that they were charging both the town and the church for the bed and breakfast. And when you report these, they're required to give you back everything they charged you over the last 6 years, plus interest at the rate they charge late bills. We got $550 back just on the lights that weren't there and were being overcharged for. When I first did this audit, I did not know the information about how to identify a street light George went through in terms of what type it was. So we didn't even do that. We already got $5.5 thousand on 80 lights. I think we're going to get another 2,000 or so when I went back and found all the high pressure sodiums that were listed as mercury vapor. And the LEDs they put in over the last year, a good third of those were miscategorized too. They were either the wrong, some were miscategorized, the lights we got were bigger than what we asked for, and some, since we asked for the smaller ones, that was pretty much the only mistake. And some they were categorized as bigger than what we asked for, even though they were the right size. Question?
I have a question on that, because we get our bills and it says we have X number of LEDs, so I've actually gone out and looked at what we have, and we have many more LEDs than are currently reflected on our bills, and they're different sizes.
Right.
So when I've asked Central Hudson about that, they've said that there's just a lag with the billing, because I feel like if we're getting billed for having only a handful of LEDs, but our system is actually more efficient, are they charging us too much for electricity right now? I'm just curious if anyone else has had a similar
We have that problem. Yeah, so the question is, Tim said that he found that his actual number of LEDs from Central Hudson is higher than what he's being billed for. And Central Hudson told him there's just a lag in billing. In my experience, that is incorrect, what Central Hudson said. So I started pestering Central Hudson about these lights that were all wrong, and they actually went and did their audit of my lights. And they actually had a person go out and look at them. And it wasn't a lag. It was, I mean, there was a lag, as in it was going to lag until we corrected it. But it was simply their crew had not recorded the changes correctly. I found lights that were LEDs that they didn't record as changed, and then I also found recorded as the wrong size. So yeah, whenever you do, since I've done this, over a span of 2 years now, I started this in 2015, maybe it was 14, end of 14. That I've seen errors, new errors appear. So there's all sorts.
Yeah, and we did, in Rosendale, we did a billing audit some months ago, and, got a big refund. Actually, it was because we were being charged for many, many poles that had no lights. So that's a different category of overcharging. But I rechecked the inventory because we're going to purchase our system, and there were still a bunch of errors. So you really, it's worth it to check it right before you do the purchase.
So we have a question?
Yeah, these questions bring up to my mind, in terms of the time that that you've had to expend on, and everything you have to expend on this, how much of it is taken up with your dealings with the utility, and how much of that is easy, and how much of it is really difficult?
So the question was how much of the time is taken up by dealing with the utility. And in my experience, the dealing with the utility is very slow. I've done it almost all by email, so it's all been pretty easy. I don't have to argue with them too much. I just have to present the facts, and eventually, and sometimes I do have to pester them to get on it, and eventually they get around to giving us the money. But it is very slow, But since it's by email, I'm not like sitting on the phone trying to get through. You have a question?
I have a question. I've had many conversations with citizenry in town here, and actually I live in the village of Tivoli, and we've discussed in my neighborhood, there's a very different feeling from person to person on whether we need that light or don't need that light. How did you make decisions to remove lights? I'm of a mind, I'd remove half of them for starters.
So, yeah, so the question was, how do we make decisions on how to remove lights? And this is just what Marbletown did. It was decided by the town board, because the ECC doesn't have any authority. The ECC came up with a list of lights that we considered candidates for removal. Basically, you know, by the design guidelines, or just, this was silly. I mean, we had, well, you know, you'll look at your list and you'll think this light's. And I would say be expansive on that list. We then sent letters to the fire departments, the police department, and the first aid unit asking, are these lights needed for safety? And there were a couple, they said, these are needed for safety, so we took them off the list. We then sent letters to all the nearby landowners saying, we're considering removing these lights. Do you object? And we got letters back. And then we categorized them. And there were ones where we had no responses, where there were ones where all the responses were, sure, get rid of the light. And all those we just removed. We had ones where the only response was, I really want to keep that light, in which case we just kept them. And then the final category, we had responses both ways, and we had a public hearing. And we looked at the, and then we invited people, we announced the public hearing standard, and we looked at the balance, or the board, you know, this was above my pay grade. The board looked at the balance of that and made decisions about the lights. We removed some of them and kept a couple of some of the others based on that. So I think basically ask the public is the short version.
Okay. Very laborious, it sounds like.
It took 9 months.
Yeah. One more question. On Cobras, there's often a piece of glass that's both smoked and C-rated or whatever, and you can't see the bulb. There's no way to see the bulb at all. So you know, you get. It's left me confused somewhat of what kind of light.
Yeah, well, there's the sticker. If the sticker is not present, you assume that it's what's on the inventory.
There's one other trick that George didn't mention. If you're there at night, and it's yellow, it's an HPS. If it's white, it's either a mercury vapor or a metal halide.
The mercury vapors tend to look more greenish,
And,
particularly as they age.
Yeah, if it's greenish, it's probably, we only had 2 types. Moving along. Okay, so let's just scroll through. I mean, this is most of what, I did this page, this was my tools, so we can skip it. And then data collection, I think George did that pretty well too. So actually, I think that's pretty much my presentation. Yeah, we sort of talked through that slide too, on how to do it, and George did that, so we can move that along.
I asked a question about the GPS location and what we marked out for coordinates, and I mentioned I had a sidebar conversation with George the other night about it. What's the level of accuracy that's required, and who are we actually putting those GPS coordinates down for? So if our GPS coordinates are 30 feet off or 60 feet off, you know, how does it affect the results of our audit with respect to, I guess, the utility as well, right?
Why don't you answer that, George?
Well, first remember, these lights are typically...
Repeat the question.
Okay, the question is, how accurate does the GPS need to be? And the simple answer is it doesn't need to be very accurate, because the poles are typically at least 150 feet apart. So if you're within 15 feet of the light, you're close enough to know that that's the pole that's associated with it. But the second thing I mentioned to you on the phone is, once you've done this and you overlay it on Google Earth, you can actually slide it over and make sure it lines up exactly with where the pole is on Google Earth, and so you can fix it. I will tell you, when I've done audits with this, every once in a while, I'll have a pole that winds up in the middle of a pond. I don't know why. When you use ArcGIS, this version, by the way, as you know, you can take pictures with this, so you can also capture photographic information with this. When you're using ArcGIS, it will tell you how many satellites it sees, and it will tell you the level of accuracy you're getting. Sometimes if you're under a lot of trees and stuff, you're gonna have a hard time getting good accuracy because you're not getting all the satellites. But most of these devices are plus or minus 3 meters, so 10, 12 feet, that's plenty close.
And your smartphone gets very accurate too if you wiggle it around.
Danielle.
I just had a question about the time it might take to determine whether or not to decommission lights versus the timeline we have to buy them from Central Hudson. I know that we run, if we go through, I mean, we have an inventory done already in Tivoli, we have a map, our lights are mapped, and one of the decisions that we were trying to figure out was, are there any of these lights that we need or don't need? I don't know if we have 9 months though, because we want to buy them from Central Hudson before the next potential, price increase because of the reasons that have been discussed before. So, I mean, can you advise or comment on that? I mean, it's only 100 lights that we have, so I don't know if
So the question is, will decommissioning slow down the purchase of the lights? Could it potentially slow down the purchase?
I think, yeah. So putting my financial out, I would make a judgment about what percentage of your lights are actually removing. If it's just 1 or 2, it's not worth waiting 9 months.
Right.
But if you're thinking about removing 20%, I'd probably say it's worth waiting.
So it would be, well, I guess we could do the math on that, right?
Yeah,
Because you
yeah.
would say it's this per fixture versus whatever the price
Right.
increase might be if we wait to buy
It's
from
about,
Central Hudson.
yeah, it's about 300 per fixture now. But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think the price increases are going to slow down because they're not replacing as many lights with LEDs anymore because of the new rules.
Okay.
Well, they also only revise the net book value every year.
Ah, there you go.
How
But-
often, Jim?
When they have to report the value for tax purposes.
So we have
So-
now until April.
Yeah.
Okay.
But,
Here's what I would suggest. What you do is you give notice to them, you say, we want to buy the lights except these,
Okay,
and run that on a parallel tab.
so do them simultaneously.
Do them simultaneously.
Okay,
Say, we're not going to buy these, we want you to remove them whenever you can get around to it, fine, but these we're going to buy.
okay.
And just two things. One,
Jim, would you mind talking into the microphone? Well, this is something we're going to try.
Sure.
For our friends who couldn't be here.
Sure. So, hello, does this make a difference?
It doesn't sound like it's on.
It doesn't sound like it's on.
Tap it.
I think it is, but you have to talk right into it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, do talk.
Speak right in.
So, we were very leisurely in our removal process because it was before, it was a few years ago. But, in Rosendale, what we did is basically we said if there was any opposition to decommissioning a light, we didn't do it
Okay.
because we didn't want to go through that,
Yeah, yeah.
But the other thing is, you're in a village, little village,
Yeah.
Tivoli, Rosendale, whole town, when you're looking at, these are often like general account lights where you'll have like an odd light on a little rural road where there's no need for a light.
Right.
So I don't know, you have to think about your circumstances too. I wanted to just say that we're not actually doing the GIS part of the audit in Rosendale because this is just our personal decision. We don't have that many lights. And so I think it would be valuable for George, for both of you to talk about the importance. You can do an audit. It doesn't mean you have to do the GIS coordinates. It's certainly valuable, but that's again like a decision, a choice you can make. And maybe you could talk about the value of that and whether if you have 20 lights, it's worth it.
And Nicholas Moran had a question. And one on us.
So I was just interested if you knew anybody decommissioning all their lights and starting from scratch.
I will, the question is whether anybody's decommissioned all of their lights and started from scratch. And I will tell you that Falmouth, Maine and Kennebunk both considered that because they felt that the lights were in such bad shape. And the way the tariff rules were, if the light was over 15 years old, they could get the utility to remove it at no cost. But what they didn't know was that they would still have to pay the stranded cost of that asset, which is what they would have paid for it had they bought it, and what the utility was going to charge them to remove it was more than what it would cost a private contractor to do it. So it ultimately didn't make any sense. It's almost always cheaper to buy the light and then get rid of it after the fact, because what you don't want to do if you're going to save $20,000 a year or $10,000 a year, screw around with this for a year and lose $10,000 when all you really would have saved is $300 or $400. It doesn't make sense.
So we're going to, Jim Quigley, Supervisor, Town of Ulster.
George, when you make the decision to convert to town-owned lights, have you seen where the utilities turned around and then ended up charging you pole rental? Because in effect, you are now owning the extension arm and the light fixture attached to their pole.
The question is about pole attachment fees. This has been an issue in a number of states. And in fact, PG&E in New Jersey doesn't charge a pole attachment fee, and we have one utility, O&R, does not or does?
It does not.
But
Central Hudson and NYSEG charge, but O&R does not.
okay.
Con Ed does not.
Here's the issue, and we've defeated this in front of the Public Service Commission every time it's been tested. I'm not so confident about your Public Service Commission in New York, but the issue is you're using electricity. In their cost allocations of their cost of distribution, the maintenance and upkeep of that pole is included in their development of the tariff. So through the tariff, you're paying for the maintenance and upkeep of that pole. On the other hand, if you're a telephone company or a cable TV company or a fiber optic company that isn't using any electricity, it's appropriate for them to pay an attachment fee to use space on the pole. There is one town in Massachusetts that got into a battle over this, and they said, fine, you want to charge me an attachment fee? We're going to charge you rent for every pole in the public way. We've been able successfully to defeat the whole notion of the pole attachment fee because we've established that that's already being covered as part of the electricity you're paying for.
All right, we really do have to take a break because we want you all to schmooze.
All right, so I mentioned earlier that the IESNA, the Illuminating Engineering Society of North America, produces a report called RP8, which is the Roadway Lighting Guidelines. And it's sort of the Bible about how you light your roadway. There is a problem, though, with RP8 in that RP8 deals with every lumen as if it were the same. And the fact of the matter is, to the human eye, there is a huge difference between two different light sources, one of which has a high color rendering index and the other one that has a poor color rendering index. So in terms of your ability to see a pothole or an object, or to read a license plate or see something clearly, the higher the color rendering index, the more easy it is for your eye to discern that. And so there are some studies that will tell you that, for example, with low pressure sodium lighting, which they've used on the Mass Turnpike, which has a color rendering index of 0, that it takes 5 times as many lumens to get the same visual clarity as you get with a white light source. So one of the things we'll talk about is, you know, RP8 is great, it kind of gives you a ballpark, but you got to use some common sense, because otherwise you're going to do what too many designers do, and you're going to overlight, and then people will be unhappy. Google the city of Brooklyn. Huge complaints California's had to take all of their LEDs down and replace them with other LEDs because people complained they were too bright. All right, so these are, as you're out, obviously the most important thing though to get out of RP8 is it's based on pedestrian activity. So if you're in a residential street, you have low pedestrian activity, then they're recommending 3/10 of an average foot candles. If it's medium pedestrian activity, it's 4/10, and if it's high pedestrian activity, 5/10. So it's pedestrian activity based. Your car headlights do a pretty good job of lighting the roadway. What you really need to see is the kid that's coming out from over here, the ball that's rolling in from over there, or the pedestrians that are getting ready to cross the street. So that's what you're paying attention to, is where am I going to have this interaction between the car and the pedestrian, where I need to make sure that people can see what's going on. The other thing is, I like to think about it, let's assume you had a town with no lights. Where would you put the first one? And as you begin to think of that from that perspective, it's always, typically it's going to be to protect the kids, schools, school areas, crosswalks where kids walk, where kids catch the bus, those kinds of places you want to make sure have illumination. Intersections. Intersections are important so I can see the street sign if I'm trying to find my way around. Of course, nowadays we have GPS, which we didn't have when I was growing up, but anyway. So think of it from those perspectives. But what you want to pay attention to is those kinds of activities that are going to cause an intense interaction of people with vehicles at night. So, for example, in Newburyport, they questioned my decision on how to light Topin Street. Well, Topin happens to go next to a high school, and on the high school was the football field, the baseball field, the tennis courts, and all of those things. And the layout of the street was such that it looked to me like I needed to make sure that anybody going down that street could see clearly the pedestrians. So that's what you're looking for as part of the audit. And then the question about what lights can you get rid of. As you go around, you're going to find a light that's doing nothing but lighting the woods. You know, I don't think anybody's going to argue about that one. Just take it down. So anyway, all right, next slide. Okay, now, I told you how to set up a table. What I like to do is to group the lights. And the grouping is actually based on a couple things. For example, a 100-watt mercury vapor lamp, when it's brand new, produces 4,000 lumens. A 50-watt high-pressure sodium lamp, when it's brand new, produces 4,000 lumens. So you're talking about two lights that essentially produce the same amount of light, but with different amounts of energy required. The other thing about mercury vapor lamps is they don't burn out. They just get dimmer and dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. Within 4 years, they've lost 35% of their light output, and it gets progressively worse after that. I replaced a 175-watt, 8,000 lumen mercury vapor lamp with a 2,500 lumen lamp, and when I went out there and measured the foot candles, I had 10 times the foot candles with the new light that I had with the old mercury vapor because it had gotten so dim. So what I do is I group them together because I know that in essence I can treat them the same. So and the other thing is the human eye can't detect 30% deviation. So I could be dimming the lights in this room up to 30% and nobody would notice I had done it. And in fact, when you put a dimming control on a street light and you dim it and dim it and dim it, you don't even know it's being dimmed until it gets beyond a certain level. So you can take a 70-watt and a 50-watt high-pressure sodium, and most people can't tell the difference between them. So you can group these together. So you remember we made the chart that showed by street the lights that were on that street. Well, if there's a 100-watt mercury vapor and a 50-watt high-pressure sodium and a 70-watt high-pressure sodium, even a 175-watt mercury vapor, I'm going to treat all of those the same in terms of the LED I'm going to select to replace them. So you want to group it that way. So then what you're really looking for on that street is that 100-watt light that's different than the others. Okay? Because that's your goal, is to figure out, I want pretty much everything on that street to be the same, all right? So, and then 400-watt lights. I don't understand 400-watt lights. Before there were LEDs, up through about 2010, I would go into a town and I would get rid of all the mercury vapors and replace them with high-pressure sodium because I could use half as much energy. And if there was a 400-watt fixture, I changed it to 250 watt. I mean, 400-watt high-pressure sodium, I would change it to a 250. Nobody ever noticed. It's kind of like your headlights in your garage when you're only 10 feet from the wall. What do you accomplish with a 50,000 lumen light is create a huge hotspot right here and typically a lot of glare, which actually reduces visibility. So I always treat my 400 watts as if they were 250. The exception to that is, and you'll cover this when you're out with the audit, they're 65 feet in the air. Now one of the things I noticed about Red Hook when I was driving in here is they have 35-foot poles here. So their lights are higher than average. So that's going to tell me that when I'm doing a design here, I need to, if I've got a range where I want to be, I'm going to err on the higher side because of the dissipation of the light from being mounted higher up, okay? And then once I'm done with categorizing all these and I've gone out and I've done my audit, it actually becomes very simple. And the fact of the matter is, next slide. I can do an entire town typically with only 3 LEDs. Okay? So this, I don't think I need to go through this. This tells you why you want to go to LEDs. It's kind of obvious. These things last 15 to 20 years. They use a lot less energy. They distribute the light better. It's just, if you're going to own the lights, and by the way, if you have a HID system, high pressure sodium is high intensity discharge system, or mercury vapor, your average replacement repair rate is about 20% per year. With an LED system, it's about 1%. So, okay, next slide.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I've been looking at the LEDs we have now that Central Hudson has put in. There's a number of them in Linden Acres. And what I think I noticed is the brighter one has a cone like so. And the less bright one has a cone like so. And I'm not sure, that's what my eyes tell me. And I know there's a substantial difference in the wattage of the amount of light of each. And the other question is there any such thing as an LED of a warmer temperature LED?
Okay, you're getting ahead of us. I will cover that.
Okay.
But can you recap?
Yeah, he's asking about the distribution light pattern and then the color temperature of the light, and we're going to cover that. This kind of just summarizes the kind of savings associated with going to LEDs. Okay, next slide.
George, how about if you do it? I have to step away first. Should be good. And if that doesn't work, there you go.
Okay.
Just
So, color temperature. Color temperature is expressed in degrees Kelvin. So, the higher the Kelvin temperature, the more white the light, more blue-white. So think of it in terms of you stick a metal rod in a furnace, and as it heats up, it goes through a color change. It becomes red, and then an orange, and eventually it becomes white, and then it melts. But then when we refer to it, we say that the lower color temperature is a warmer color. Go figure. But, for example, these lights here are probably 3,500 Kelvin,
maybe,
which is most office settings. LED lights originally came out, they were mostly in the 5,700 degree Kelvin temperature range, and then we were able to get them down to 4,000, and then now we can get them down to 2,700 degrees Kelvin. The issue has been that when you make an LED makes a white light, it doesn't make white light by itself. It's basically a long wavelength blue or ultraviolet chip that is embedded with phosphorus. So it actually works the same as a fluorescent fixture. The blue light causes the phosphorus to glow, and the mix of phosphorus in the light is what produces the color of the light. In order to get the warmer color temperatures, the lower color temperatures, you had to add more phosphorus. The problem with that is it caused the chip to be hotter. It trapped more heat in it, and it caused it to be less energy efficient. So for example, the life expectancy of a chip would go from at 5,000 Kelvin, 100,000 hours. At 3,000 Kelvin, it would be 50,000 hours. So it would cut the life expectancy in half. And secondly, if you look, for example, at the Leotech GC14 light, at 4,000 Kelvin, it gets 100 lumens per watt. At 3,000 Kelvin, it's at 85.7. So there was a 15% loss in energy efficiency. So those two things were problematic. We've kind of overcome that. We've figured out how to manage the heat better and how to do this better, and plus the efficacy of these chips has gotten so much higher that we can afford to accept some losses. So AMA came out recently, about a year ago or so, and said, LED lights are making you sick. Okay, well, that's a stretch. What they really said is that an LED light puts out more light in the blue wavelength that tends to affect people's ability to produce melatonin and affects your sleep-wake cycles. So our eyes tend to respond, the ganglions in our ganglia in our eyes tend to respond to the blue light, and it affects how we produce melatonin. So what they were, and then if people who don't get enough sleep tend to have more illness than people that get enough sleep. So that's the stretch. If you're looking at an LED light and it causes you not to sleep as much, then you're going to be sick. So LED lights are making you sick. But I'm in my house. The LED light is out there on the street. The elephant in the room is these lights. It's that screen. It's my TV. It's, you know, what my bedside lamp is made from and how it puts out light. And the other thing is the AMA took such a narrow perspective of all of this, as I already pointed out, that the warmer color temperature is less energy efficient. That means I have to produce more electricity, which means I have to emit more stuff into the air while I'm producing electricity. They don't last as long, so I have to make more of them, so I have to dispose more of them, and I have to have more manufacturing byproducts. And what's the impact of all of that on my health? So, you know, they got a lot of flack over this. But the fact of the matter is, if you light this street with 3,000 Kelvin lights, and you light that street with 4,000 Kelvin lights, and ask the public to go look at it and see what they think, they like the 3,000 Kelvin better. Well, it's the history of fire and candles and all of that business. It's evolution and what we like. If you ask the police and the fire and the DPW guys which one they like the 4,000 Kelvin because they actually can see a little bit more clearly under. Things are sharper. It's a decision you have to make. The other thing that's happening right now with the technology is you can now buy, Cree is the first one to really come out with it, an LED light that you can't see the chip. So it's indirect, it's referred to as indirect. And so the LEDs are actually mounted inside the light horizontally. They project out into an optic array that then distributes the light. Now that goes to your other question about the distribution pattern. And I've got a slide to address that, I think. You can buy an LED light that has an optic pattern that you define when you order it. Whether you want a long, narrow distribution, or you want a circular distribution, or an elliptical distribution. Those are types of distribution patterns.
Yeah. I noticed Central Hudson uses different Cobra heads for the two different bulbs they use.
So, color, we talked, distribution pattern, we touched on wattage. The cheapest light you can buy is one that is a 25 watt or a 40 watt, and that's it. You put it up, and that's what it does. You can also now, most of these companies are only producing lights that have the dimmable driver, the 0 to 10 volt dimming driver, which gives you the ability to through a control device, dim the light or make it brighter. Some of them will also produce a light that has an internal dimming switch, a mechanical switch that you can adjust internal to the fixture and change its light output. And I'll talk about that, but I like that feature. There is a slight difference in price. The warmer color lights are more expensive. The dimming switch adds about $5 to $7 to the fixture costs. The fixture, and I have a slide that actually shows you expected cost, but the fixture is only $120 or thereabouts. Depends on whether you get the one where it's indirect light or whether you get the one that is the older style. And then on top of the fixture is a photocell receptacle to put your photocell in. And the new ANSI standard, American National Standards Institute, the 136.41 standard is a 5-pin receptacle. Can we go to the next slide?
Yes, do you want to try that, see if that works? You have to put it down. It's a little mouse.
Yeah, I know that, but don't I just do that?
There you go.
So the old photocell just had these 3 slots, so it was kind of like an outlet, for a 220-volt dryer or something. What we've done is we've added the ability to have 4 more contacts on the outside. The most common is you'll buy, if you don't specify differently, is going to be the 5-pin. You want to specify 7-pin. Always. This is what turns the light on and off, these 3 right here. This allows you to connect a control to it and dim the light remotely through an RF radio frequency signal of some sort, or Bluetooth. These other 2 are if you want to attach another sensor, a weather sensor, a motion sensor, or any other sensor to it. The difference in cost between 5-pin and 7-pin, maybe $2. So whether you want to do any of that stuff right now, buy it with the capability, because that light's going to be in the air for 15 or 20 years, and you want to be future-proofed for taking advantage of these capabilities as they get more mature. This particular device is something I've been helping a company drive to get to. This is, I call it a hockey puck. It sits between the photo control and the street light, and what it has on it is data and power ports. And it has its own meter chip built into it. So that if you have that, you put that in place, put the photo control on it, you then can attach other devices, plug it in here, and use the network from the controls to communicate information back. In addition, this will measure the energy consumed by that device, and also arrange for the transmission of the information.
What's the network are those on? I mean, how do they
I'm
communicate?
going to get the controls in more detail in a minute. So the Design Lights Consortium has been conferring with Pat and the team about what standards they're thinking about providing incentives. And they've been asking us what should they require? How do they make sure the communities get a good project? And what we have suggested and they've adopted is that first your lights have to be on the Design Lights Consortium's qualified products list. That ensures it's going to be a decent product. And the standard has just been changed to the light has to produce a minimum of 90 lumens per watt. It has to have a power factor of higher than 90%, and the harmonics have to be less than 20%. Those are the main criteria. So the second thing they're going to require if you want to grant is that you do the 7-pin photocell receptacle. Again, because it doesn't really cost anything and it future-proofs you.
Can I, George,
For the
just
record.
one clarification. So these standards were for NYSERDA. NYSERDA is getting applications for proposals from communities that got their clean energy community status. They want to spend their money on streetlight conversion. So NYSERDA is trying to come up with, some guidance for municipalities, some basic guidance for municipalities. They're not developing new incentives.
No, you have to first do the other main events before you can then qualify for the additional funds.
So just to recap for our friends in the audience, point of information came from Jen Metzger that the recommendations on the screen are a group that we gave to NYSERDA as they review the applications through the Clean Energy Communities program for streetlight projects.
Now, the last one, it says a minimum of 55% kilowatt hour reduction. You actually will do much better than that. But the reason for that is we wanted to allow for some communities that may be underlit and they need to ramp up their lighting levels. I wanted to give you some space to be able to do that. But we see savings of in excess of 70%. So, all right. Now, we've gone through this process and we've audited the streetlights. We've identified locations where we think we need a little extra light as opposed to maybe the rest of the neighborhood. So, and we've talked about some of the capabilities with the LEDs. Now, if you think you're going to have controls at some point in the future, and I think you should always consider that, then I think you also want to make sure you select a light fixture that has the ability to be brighter than you need it to be, as well as dimmer than you need it to be, so that you operate it at, say, a mid-range, and then if there's a fire on the street and the fire department wants you to provide extra light to help them fighting the fire, you have the ability to do that. Or if there's an incident on the street, or you want to make the light flash at a particular location to help somebody locate that location. That's why you do this. And so one of the things I like to do is let's say that I have a 100 watt, for this location, I need a 100 watt HPS light is going to be what I'm thinking. So what you need to replace a 100 watt HPS is something in the 35 to 42 watt range. So I would buy a 50 watt fixture. I would get the internal control, and I would dim it down to my 35 to 38 watt requirement. Now I'm going to do two things. I'm going to make the light more energy efficient, because as you dial it down, the energy efficiency of the light goes up. But the second thing is I'm going to be driving it less hard, so it's actually going to increase its life expectancy. Then if later I come in and I install a control on top of that light, I just manually turn it back up to the 50 watts, and I use the control then to dim it back down to where I want it to be. So that's how I would do a design. Now, what's the beauty of that is, okay, Elm Street has 3 locations on it where I think, because of a pedestrian crosswalk and a kids in a park, I need extra light. Well, I've got the 50 watt capability along that entire street. I can put the same light on the entire street, but at those 3 locations I can set the dimmer at a different level. Now I only have to stock 1 light in my DPW yard. And when the guy goes out to repair, he doesn't have to look to see what the pole number is and what light we put on that pole and all of that stuff, so he knows what to get off the shelf. And I've got 65 different flavors up there on the shelf. You don't have to do that. When he gets out there, he takes the light down and he says, oh, the Q dialer is set for 5. Set the Q dialer for 5, put it up. Real simple. So that's my DPW thinking. These give you some guidelines as to what we recommend in terms of the equivalent. Now this is based on today's technology, which is in and around 100 lumens per watt. This is going to change, and it's changing pretty rapidly. I'm seeing fixtures that have efficacies as high as 150 lumens per watt. So obviously that would alter all of this. But as of right now, these are some pretty good guidelines, and if you follow these, you won't have complaints about the lights being too bright, or they will be very limited. We've had very good success with this.
Are these controls by remote control, or does it have to be set when it's put in place?
I thought I had some slides in here about, who doesn't want to back up? I thought I had a slide in here about controls. Maybe I do, and I've just got it in the wrong order. The control device doubles the cost of your project. So you buy a street light, an LED light, anywhere from, say, $125 to $160 for most of your residential applications. If you want to buy a control for that, it's going to cost you another $100 to $120 per location. So it adds to the price. And the other thing it does is it's another mechanism for failure. So when you're estimating how often you're gonna have to repair a light, the minute you add a control to it, you gotta double that number. So if it's 1% for the LED, you gotta add another 1% in for the controls.
So, George, before you get away from this topic about dimming, so as I understand what you're saying is, we can purchase the dimmable light fixture, they manually, and you use the term Q dialer, I'm assuming that's the dimming dialer?
That's the dimming switch.
The dimming switch on there. How accurate are those dimming switches so that, let's say I want to put 50 of this product on this and I want them all to be the same light, but I want to reduce the light when it's installed. The second part of this question is, when we're negotiating the rate for electricity, you're going to get into that, I'm assuming. I'm just kind of anticipating that next.
Okay, so the question is, how accurate are the dimmers, so that if you set the dimmers for 55 lights on one street, are they all gonna look the same? And the
Right.
answer is generally yes, they are, they're pretty accurate. And remember, the human eye can't detect a 30% variance anyway, so, you know, you can have some variation. The second thing is that, and you raise a very good point, and that is, if you buy a fixture that can go all the way up to 50 watts, but you're going to set it to operate at 38 watts, what is Central Hudson going to do? And that's a discussion you have to have with Central Hudson before you make your final decision. We've been successful in setting them and then actually putting a 38 watt sticker on the lamp with an agreement with the utility that if we make it lower, we can do that at will, but if we're going to make it higher, we have to give them advance notice and get their approval. But that's a discussion you have to have with the utility.
Okay. You want me to go there?
No.
Okay.
Well, I think you could shut up.
Okay. Yeah, so when you switch over in Central Hudson territory and they're unique, the other utilities are not this way, they have charges, distribution charges, or delivery only rate you're switching to, and it's basically in 10 watt ranges. It's a different price within 10 watts. So if you set your, lights 1 watt below, and that puts you in a new price category, you'll have to see, Central Hudson hasn't confronted that yet, so you need to have that conversation, because when you're applying to convert with them, you have to submit an application that lists, all of the lights and then every light you're replacing it with and the wattage. So it's definitely good to have that conversation with them.
Yeah. In National Grid Service territory, they have a 50 watt tranche in Massachusetts and New York, and in Rhode Island it's 20 watts. So we game it. We put in a 19 watt, or we put in a 49 watt, or we put in a 99 watt. We game it because they're going to build that at 75 watts. Now it's created a huge problem because it's the ability to go with an alternative energy supplier, who in the case of Providence is being underpaid $15,000 a month because we gamed the way they do it, and they report their billing wattage, they don't report their actual wattage. So that's about to, create a problem. So this just gives you an idea how much it's going to cost. For estimating purposes, you can think in terms of about $350 per light installed as an average cost. So if you have 100 lights, you figure it's going to cost you $300, $350 per light. And if you add controls, then you have to raise that to $450 to $500. Now, the controls, there's a whole variety of them. There's a lot of different ways to approach this. You have mesh networks, and in a mesh network, each control can communicate with a nearby control. They have limited range. If it's on a 2.4 gigahertz, which is a common frequency, the range is shorter than if it's on a 900 megahertz. And then you have another company, Census, that does licensed FCC frequencies, So they do point to point, and they have a 15-mile range. So they put a tower up and they talk to everything within a 15-mile radius of that pole. And really, it kind of depends on what you want. And we don't know at the end of the day where this is going to play out because there's no standards. So the people that are producing the weather sensors and other sensors, they're operating kind of in their own vertical arena, and they're developing theirs based on what they think. I think the direction we're going is, because the other thing that's going to happen in the next 3 years is our cars are going to talk to each other. The Federal Department of Transportation is talking about what's called DRSC, where cars actually communicate with one another and provide information short range so that communities have a better way of managing traffic, and it can help. That's going to be on the 802 megahertz probably frequency. So all of these systems eventually are going to connect together, but nobody's come up with a single standard. So if you had a Verizon phone, you wouldn't be able to talk to somebody on a Sprint phone, and you couldn't talk to somebody who had an AT&T phone. What's happening is they're developing these systems to have analytics built in so that you don't need to talk to it. It will analyze the situation, take advantage of the network to communicate actions, and the actions take place automatically without a person being involved. The second thing that's happening is you have companies like Cisco have gotten into this play, you've got Census is in this play, Verizon has gotten into this play. So it's also very possible that this sensor is now going to have a plug-and-play place where you plug in a radio transmitter. So it doesn't come with a transmitter, and if your system is on 2.4 gigahertz, then you buy the 2.4 gigahertz transmitter and plug it in. I think that's probably more likely as a solution as to where these are going to be agnostic in terms of what frequency they operate on, and that allows them to operate in the marketplace much more widely. But that's the challenge with controls. Which horse is going to be at the finish line at the end of the race? And how do you pick the right one? There are plenty of outfits out there. I've tended to hang my hat on those that are well into the AMI, the advanced meter infrastructure space. So they've been doing this with electric meters, and they've got a lot of money invested in electric meters that operate on their network. I think those companies are going to be around for a while. There's a lot of others that are coming from China and other places I don't know about. So you have to be careful when you choose these. How do you pay for all of this? Are you going to discuss this, Ken? Or Nina?
We could.
Or you want me to cover it?
You can.
Okay.
You want to talk about it? Yeah.
Really, our expert on this is Nina, except for the last one, which is tax exempt municipal leases, and that's the way I've generally been financing most of my projects. You all are familiar, I assume, with the bands and with bonds. The problem that bond anticipation notes, they are of a limited duration, they have set interest rates. You borrow the money in advance of some future bond, and then you roll it all together into the future bond.
It's
Basically
1 year,
how it
you
works.
can renew up to 5 years.
Okay. The problem that I have with bonds is most people forget the upfront costs with setting up a bond. So you have all kinds of transaction costs. You have underwriter fees, legal fees, paper costs, and so on and so forth. A typical bond can cost $50,000 or $60,000 to issue, even if it's only $1 million bond. Now, there are some communities that routinely go out and do bonds, and so that cost is already covered, and so adding to the bond to cover this is no big deal. But obviously, a bond is going to affect your debt limit and your bond rating. The more money you borrow against what you're expecting to get in affects your credit as a community. The beauty of a tax-exempt municipal lease is it's subject to annual appropriation. It's actually an operating expense. If you don't appropriate the money next year to pay for the lease, you don't pay it. And now the leasing company owns all your streetlights. I don't know what they're going to do with them, but they own your streetlights. And there's no upfront transaction costs. So the rates we've been getting have been in the 2.5% to 3% range. And it takes 30 to 45 days. Usually the holdup on this is how long it takes you to sign the papers, and getting it to council or whatever you have to do to sign the papers is usually the biggest holdup. Once these are set up, if you want to pay it off early, you can. And there's no penalties associated with that beyond typically 1 year's interest. And it's really kind of neat the way it works, because normally if you get a bill from a vendor, that bill goes to the department head who's responsible for having incurred that bill. That person, I know when I was a DPW director, Thursday morning was when Pauline would bring all of the bills to me to review, and I would review them and sign off on them, and then they would go to the finance department where they got put on a warrant, and then the warrant would go to the board of selectmen, and then when the board met, they'd review and approve the warrant, and then that was done, and then it went to the people that cut the checks, and checks were cut on Friday. So it could be a month before the check actually got in the mail. Under this arrangement, it's much easier, because you borrow the money, it goes into an escrow account that's held by the bank. And you get a bill in, it gets approved, you send the approval to pay to the bank, and they issue a direct payment to the vendor. So you can pay your vendors within a week, because it's usually it's not a check, it's normally a wire transfer. So if you get a deal with your vendor that says if you pay within so many days you get a discount, it's the way to do it. And part of what we've done in Rhode Island with our vendors is because we've set this kind of a system up, we got a much better rate, agreed on rate from them, because we're going to pay them quickly. So I think, for me, this is a very effective way of financing these projects. Now, in the case of if you are getting an incentive, let's say your project is $200,000 or $300,000 and you're going to get a $50,000 grant from NYSERDA. So the net amount of money you have to borrow is $250,000. Keep in mind, the fact is vendors expect to get paid promptly, and the incentive monies frequently aren't distributed to you until months after the project is finished and you've closed out all the papers and been through all whatever they require. That can create a problem with cash flow. So what we've typically done is finance the full project value, not accounting for any incentives, so that we have the money in the bank to pay the bills. And then the other thing we do is we will defer the first payment on the lease until after the project is finished, and we anticipate sufficient time that our billing will now reflect the savings. And it's the savings that will pay for the thing. Now your note will accumulate interest during those months. But the point is you don't have to begin making the first payment until you actually have the savings. And then when you finally get the check from the incentive check, you can either buy down the note, make a substantial payment against principal. Doesn't change your payment amount by each month, but it will accelerate the time it takes to pay the note off and effectively reduce the interest rate you're paying. So that's how I like to do it, is to do it that way. So that's everything. Who has questions? Y'all know how to do this now, so you can go out and sign your lights.
When do we get the test?
So, our next section, we actually blew past the time for the break, but the coffee's ready. A little angel from Dobbs Ferry brought us some cookies, and we can continue our discussion. Our thought was to have small group discussions because we have, a number of people in the room who can be helpful in this regard. However, if everyone has the same question, we're still a pretty small group, all of us. Mm-hmm. So we're also open, to staying as one circle of people. But Nicholas had a question.
Yeah, I had a question about the LED streetlight tariffs. In Central Hudson territory, it's a range of wattages with limits, and I just want to know how do you deal with that, and also when you go to LEDs, you tell Central Hudson what you have, how do you tell them, and how do you best game the system or?
Well, the question is the interaction between the town and the utility in regards to the wattages and the fact that some of the utilities have a tiered structure, billing structure. So if you have a 10-watt tier structure and you report you're going to be using a 38-watt light, it's going to be billed at 35 watts. And you're going to tell them you're putting up a 38-watt light, that's fine. Where you can have an issue is if you're putting up a 50-watt light that you're internally adjusting to 38 watts. And that's where you have to have the conversation with them, because what we've done is we've agreed that the utility has the right to inspect our lights at any time to see if we've altered them from what we reported. And if they find that we have, they have the right to inspect every light in town at my expense and to retroactively bill me back to the date I bought and put the lights up for every light they found that deviated from what we told them. So there's a huge risk for a community to get involved with trying to shortchange the utility. But, you know, the fact of the matter is, our argument has always been, look, you guys have been managing these lights. We've trusted you all these years. Look at all the mistakes you have in your system. You haven't even been billing us right, and yet you expect us to do better than you do. Look, we're gonna pass a bylaw or something that says we're not gonna change this without giving you advance notice and so on and so forth. You need to give us the same courtesy we've given you over the years. And that's kind of the way you have the conversation with them. But you have to know what they're going to do so you can make your final design decisions.
Now, Jen, this time, come up here if you wouldn't mind.
Right. Well, I'm sorry, I was out the room, but just to add to something you just said. So, you know, are you talking about the Q dialer and adjusting the light?
Well, his question is because there's a tiered structure, how do you manage that? Well, one is you know, as you look at your decisions about the lights you're going to order, you keep that in the back of your mind. What is the tier? And you pick within that tier.
Right.
But then the second thing is if you're going to set it so that it would actually be in a different tier than what you're buying it at, then that's the conversation you have to have with the utility and reach an agreement with them in advance.
Right. And I just want to point out, like when you were talking to the utility about this, I mean, it's really taking the same light and adjusting the wattage. It's like you have to go through the same action that you would have to go through replacing the light. You have to go up and manually make the change on the light. And so there's not really a difference from the utility's perspective. You can sneak install lights or you could sneak change the wattage, but there's definitely a risk to that. So just, that shouldn't be a problem, I don't think, to use the range of lights. With the tiered structure for Central Hudson, it makes much more sense in other utility service territories. They just have a charge per kilowatt hour, and that's what you're charged. If you have a 30-watt light, you're charged, you know, whatever that price is per kilowatt hour. Central Hudson it's a complicated accounting trick, but essentially, the less energy you use, the higher rate you pay. So the lower your LED wattage, the relatively more you're going to pay. But the differences are not enormous, and keep in mind that your supply costs are really a very small portion of your overall bill. I mean, on street lighting, so it's not going to make an enormous difference.
The other thing is that if you all are participating in this collaborative action, you're going to have us right there with you, helping you through this whole process. That's one of the benefits of being a member of the collaborative up front. We're going to handhold for you, and we're going to give you all the help that you need. Anybody else that comes after, they're going to have to rely on our webinar or whatever we've got on the web, because we can't afford to be going out and personally helping every community individually. But for the collaborative, we're going to help you through it, and then you'll become the people that they can also turn to and ask, what was your experience and what did you learn?
Yeah, and just tack one more. And you're going to see when you purchase your streetlight system, you're going to get an operating agreement. You're going to have to sign that operating agreement with the utility, And it's gonna be very specific about the process you have to go through when you convert a light or make a change to a light. It's not cumbersome, it's not that difficult, but you do have to notify the utility, and that process is set in stone, and you're signing that agreement, so.
Well, speaking of the
You had a
consortium,
question.
oh, okay, hang on,
You, go ahead.
go, no, you go.
You mentioned a webinar, and I unfortunately got the wrong time for this. Is there something I
This
can
is
get
all
online?
being recorded.
Yeah, we have a
Okay.
videographer here with us today, and then we're also recording this as a webinar. So,
And where would that be accessed?
nystreetlights.org is our website.
And you'll probably be sending out the
And
links.
everyone who's
to-
registered would also get the links as well. One of the questions that came up during the break that I thought you both could mull is that, you know, benefits of this consortium include the transparency that we're bringing to this process, and then how we can all learn from each other's experience, which you just talked about. So in New Paltz, I think Tim has apprised you of the fact that he's got now a different contract than when he first asked for a contract from Central Hudson. This could happen to other people too, because some people have been at
Right.
this for a while. And what I suggested was that, again, to further the transparency and share information, we could even set up a conference call, say with someone who's completed the transaction, like the city of Kingston, which has the later contract. No? They have the earlier?
Yes,
Oh.
they have the earlier one.
Well,
So-
never mind.
But, they're.
Just step a little bit
Yeah,
further so
sorry.
they can see.
So it's not gonna, their operating agreement, purchase agreement, their boilerplate agreements, they revised them. They had to revise them because an order came out from the Public Service Commission. We had actually submitted comments in that process complaining about certain things, and the Public Service Commission ordered them to do different things, so they've had to change their agreement slightly, but most of it is the same. There are some different provisions, but a lot of it is the same. But there's no reason why we can't share that agreement, so you can see it. I don't know how many towns probably are still mid-process or have got a different one, but, I mean, the biggest difference, so we had argued against them charging municipalities this post-construction survey fee, and the Public Service Commission said, yes, you can charge a post-construction survey fee, and so they took that out, but then they added a $6 administration fee, so essentially, they always are finding ways to get around that. So but it's small potatoes. It's not very much, doesn't amount to much money.
Can you talk about negotiating changes to those templates that are being sent out now?
Yeah. I mean, you want to look over, Robert asked if we could speak about negotiating changes to the draft agreements that Central Hudson puts before you when you're purchasing your system. Everything is theoretically negotiable, but you do have to keep in mind that they don't have to sell their streetlight system, and so they really kind of have more leverage than you do to change. And most of the terms, a lot of the terms are perfectly reasonable in the operating agreement. The things you want to look for are, so there'll be dates that say, you have 5 days to respond to pay this bill to Central Hudson. Well, municipal billing cycle, that's like impossible. So you want to say, no, we would like 45 days or 60, you want to look for that kind of thing. I guess I'll be the guinea pig with that, with our town, but one of the requirements of their old agreement that we said they really can't require of municipalities is to provide everything to them in GIS. And our argument was that the utility should know where its own lights are. That, why should we pay for that, you know? And the Public Service Commission agreed, but it still seems to be in the agreement, so we're gonna try to take it out. If you're doing an audit anyway, it doesn't matter. But you know, we can share some of the changes that we had asked for in the Kingston agreement. A lot of them are the same. So, you know, I think that'd be helpful. But, you know, just in general, I mean, I think you can call us, write us, if there's a question that you have, or if something doesn't seem right to you. But it's important to have your town attorney look over, you know, all the sections, especially about liability. And you want to call your insurance company, check with your insurance agent to see, you know, their insurance provisions in taking over the streetlight system. You have to add the utility as an additionally insured. So you want to see what potentially, if there may be no cost associated with that, but you just want to check.
So because we have some folks in the room who are very, very new to this, I did put up on this screen, you know, the basic steps, which we've alluded to, but we haven't really gone back to some of the basic steps. And since you are standing here, and you were a pioneer in some of those basic early steps, you in Marbletown, I wonder if you want to talk about any of that.
Right, so, all right, purchasing system. So, I mean, the first thing you want to do is really the first thing that George talked about. You want to do an audit, at minimally a billing audit of your lights before you take your system over, because they do routinely overbill. So you want to know, you want to confirm what you have. So that's like an important first step. And then a lot of the other steps, there are things that you're going to be doing simultaneously. So, for instance, like the RFP for the community managed approach, that RFP is going to go out this fall, right? Robert, I think that's so. You know, you can be listed as a participant in that, even if you haven't purchased your streetlight system yet, even if you haven't begun that process, because I believe you should have the RFP allows you to have a whole year, right? After the RFP has been, the winning bidder has been selected, you have a whole year after that to negotiate a contract with them. So while this RFP process is happening, right, you should be, first of all, you should contact your utility and say, we want to get this process going, so provide me with an estimate of the streetlights. And, yep, you have to do it in writing.
We have the template on our website.
We have a template?
A template letter, yep.
Oh, great. We have a template letter, apparently, on our website. So, yeah, it's very straightforward with Central Hudson. And then they'll send you the draft agreements for you to consider, and you have 180 days, or no, yes, you have 180 days to decide whether or not to move forward. You don't want to take all that time. And while that process is occurring, you should be working on your lighting design and, you know, what you want to do. Make sure you have an understanding of what you have and start thinking about, you know, what you're going to replace those lights with. What types of LEDs. And then, let's see.
The third-party providers are listed on our website.
Well, you can announce that.
All right, well, you had Marbletown and Rosendale. I mean, you did your own billing audit originally, but then you backed into using a third party.
Right, we didn't do a billing audit. So what Rosendale did is, and this was like years ago, but what we did is we did a field assessment of our lights. So we went out there, we checked the utility inventory against what exists in the field, but we didn't have all the knowledge that I now have from George. And we identified lights that could be decommissioned, and we identified lights whose wattages, brightness levels could be needed to be changed. Typically, they needed to be reduced. And that is informing our decisions about what wattages LED wattages to use as replacements. But we just contracted out the billing audit, and for Rosendale, it was well worth it. You know, they found $30,000 in overcharges for 160, well, it was 190 lights at the time. So that was significant, but they take a huge chunk of that.
Between 35 and 40%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How much?
No.
40 to
40%.
50.
Oh, no cash up front.
No cash up front. They just
Okay.
take a percentage of any
Save.
refund you get. So it makes sense. It's a time saver potentially. But yeah, and we had done that ahead of time. And then, you know, we had our environmental commission did the assessment ourselves. It was a 9-member. We just divided up the lights. We recruited some other volunteers who lived in neighborhoods with lights, and we went and talked to neighbors. And the process, as I said, we had then 190 lights. It didn't take very much time. I mean, you can do a bunch of lights in one day, and I think we had 10 of us all together. So it was fairly quick.
I mean, listening to Tom, listening to you, you know, I understand Tom's been doing this for 2 years, and it sounds like it's a moving target. So I guess my question is, you know, what's the disparity between the 2 years of continuously going through this inventory assessment and, you know, trying to figure out refunds, or maybe I just totally misunderstood what Tom was saying, and and the question of when are you done?
Right.
When is enough information
Right.
to go forward?
Yeah, I mean, you don't need to go through that process. You don't have, you as a community can decide, we're just gonna replace our lights. It's not likely we're gonna wanna decommission any, and just, you know, move that process forward. And the billing audit, it really makes sense to do a billing audit. I really feel like minimally you wanna do that. And, you know, if it's too much of a hassle to do it yourself, you know, it's a great option not to have to take anything out of pocket. You can't lose, you can only gain. So it does take a few months to do. So,
I think the difference between the 2 years that you spend and the time you spend is that we now have a professional working with us who's just, you know, and we're sharing information across an entire region. So we think we can shave a lot of time off your experience.
Yeah, and I want to say that the 2 years really actually, most of the reason for the 2 years is we've been waiting for the Mid-Hudson Streetlight Consortium to do this RFP. I mean, I think
So
the
you just keep
actual...
going back out there while you're waiting?
Yeah, just because things have changed over time.
Okay.
And the maintenance level is just, we've just been doing maintenance, and we did do that 9-month process of removing a lot of lights. So that was an issue, but that's again it's an option.
right, we weren't under any deadline. We were just dilly-dallying. I mean, it was our environmental commission.
But that's real, that's
You
how
know, we
volunteer
didn't, right, I mean,
activities are.
we saw LED upgrades back then. I mean, it was 2013, no one was really talking about LED. None of the utilities had LED options back then. Like, you know, this has all happened recently, and this, you know, so you can do things much more quickly than we did, much more quickly.
Give me a couple examples. This town of Lincoln with 285 streetlights, a good percentage of them were incandescent, like the one I showed you. Met with me at the end of August. Their project was finished on the 19th of December. Start to finish. We audited their system, designed their system, procured the materials, hired the contractors, and did the work.
How many lights was that, George?
285. City of Providence sent notice to National Grid in June of 2015 that they wanted to buy their lights. And in spite of the 60-day time limit in the statute, we didn't get the first half of the lights to purchase until February the following year. And the final documents for the other balance were signed in March. By the first week in December, we'd converted 780 lights to LEDs with controls. So if you want to go fast, you can.
So an important point to keep in mind, though, is that it takes you can't purchase the streetlight system overnight. That process takes a minimum, that's gonna take you a minimum of 5 months. And that's like if you're, moving along, your town board, really goes forward, signs the agreement as soon as it's ready. Because the Public Service Commission, whatever you and the utilities sign, those agreements have to go to the Public Service Commission, and it has to sit with the commission. If that value, if the purchase price is under $100,000, it has to sit with the commission for 90 days. And then if they don't take any action, then the sale is approved. I've never heard of them not approving a sale, but that is what's required. It has to sit with them for 90 days. And if it's over $100,000 in value, which is probably not going to be the case for anyone in this room, you're looking, the commission has to positively make a statement, decide whether or not to approve the sale, and that can take up to 6 months. So you have plenty of time to get your ducks in a row. So when the day it is approved, you should be ready. You're going to sign your contract. You've already done the RFP. The RFP's out there. The installer has been picked. You should be working on what fixtures am I going to buy through the state bid process, blah, blah, blah. Get all that information figured out so, you can really move forward really quickly.
That's exactly what happened in Providence. Was Alan Seppi was making decisions before he ever owned the lights. We had already ordered all the replacement LEDs. He just was going to take a chance. That's just the way he operated. Most of the time delays I experience is with municipal processes.
Right. Oh, sorry, I keep getting in front of the camera. So chapters, just as a chapter 6 of the municipal guide that we referred to earlier, it sums up the whole report, but in a step-by-step fashion. This is what you should do next. And so we can make that available to you, just that last chapter, I think. And it's on the website already, apparently, so I don't know who.
Danielle?
Just a quick follow-up. Okay, so just so I'm really clear on this. A little while ago, the conversation was Central Hudson needs to know exactly what you're going to put in the place of the lights that they have.
But yes, but not when you purchase the system.
Okay, that's really important. Okay,
Yeah.
so that we don't have to have already figured out our
Right.
lighting
Right.
plan for the purchase. Okay,
Right.
just so we're all really
Right.
clear on that?
So
Okay.
Danielle asked, I had mentioned earlier that you have to give your replacement scheme to Central Hudson. But you do not have to do that at the time that you're purchasing the system. This is all laid out in your actual operating agreements with them. You can do it anytime after you purchase the system, but you have to submit this application to them, but you can do it right after you purchase the system. Here's the application, here's what we want. And they need to have this information, obviously, because they need to know what to bill you and when. And there's a whole process for keeping them apprised of that work.
Do they need to approve whatever that list is before we can have them installed?
Yep.
So we need to have that ready that should be ready within 90
Yeah,
days.
and you can talk to them about, if you had it, you could do it simultaneously.
Right.
And so that you're really ready to go. I don't think they'll have any problem with that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that's exactly
They
right.
probably
That's-
prefer it if you.
As soon as you finish your audit, you do a preliminary design, I don't care where you are in the other process, I would sit down with them right away and say, here's what we're thinking about doing, we want to make sure this is good with you, and how are you going to bill us for it?
Okay, great, thanks.
I'm just curious about relationship with Central Hudson, because I've never heard you mention anybody's name as a contact at Central Hudson.
Well, it
So-
depends where you live, because they have different people that represent different areas of the service territory. So for me, I've gone through two, have retired years since I've been dealing with them, and it's now Jason. I can't remember his last name, but and you all are.
Yeah, and I'm right next door to her, and I use Patrick and Patrick Gallion.
Yeah, but he won't be the one who's doing the
Okay.
sale, he's someone else. Mark Mulpeter, he's kind of in charge, but, yeah, so it depends where you live. But the contact, if you contact Mark Mulpeter, and we have the contacts, don't we, on our website, so, you know, you can just ask who the contact is.
So, while you're taking a breath, I wanted to invite Carla Castillo of Hudson Valley Regional Council to just say a little bit about what the council is thinking of in terms of clean energy communities engagement around this issue. Yeah, come on up here because we still have some loyal souls participating by webinar. I hope they have coffee, that's all I can say.
So my
No,
name
this
is.
way, I'm sorry, the
Thank you.
camera is here, so if you stand where the red thing is.
Okay. So my name is Carla Castillo, and I work with Nicolas Moran in the Mid-Hudson Valley. We work closely with communities in the 7-county region of the Mid-Hudson. And one of the things that we have been looking at is to what degree we can assist municipalities with their field inventories. So we are going to be doing a couple of test cases to begin, and we would love to work with a couple of you that are on the smaller light size range, say 100 and under, because we would love to train you, but we first need to make sure that we have all our ducks in a row, and we're going to be working with George and potentially Tom to make sure that we have all our ducks in a row so that when we train you, it can be a seamless process for you. So I have cards here, Nicholas has cards. Feel free to reach out to us so that we can identify those communities that have lights under 100 to work with. Okay, great, thank you.
Absolutely. Good deal. Right. So this isn't necessarily what you wanted to talk about, but I just want to make sure we hit it.
Yeah, so let's talk about it quickly. So all of the municipalities that provided a copy of their inventory in Excel, their streetlight inventory in Excel, and a copy of their streetlight bill in any form, are receiving through the Mid-Hudson Streetlight Consortium the full workbook, like the one that you have from Red Hook that you received. So you won't have to learn pivot tables yourselves. You'll have all that functionality included in the
Can you
workbook.
differentiate between the town of Red Hook and the village of Red Hook?
We have.
We're not quite on the same schedule, but we're close.
You would have a different inventory, I believe.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it's already done.
I did, it's just,
Or it's been done.
The village of Red Hook and the village of Tivoli, I believe, have been done.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
it's just when you say Red Hook, it could be one.
I
Of
see
course,
what you mean.
yes.
Okay, yes, from the town
There we go.
inventory.
Okay.
that,
It's okay, Charlie. We know that you're an entity of yourself.
So you all got some high-level guidance regarding how to use that workbook, and there will be additional assistance provided from George and the Mid-Hudson Streetlight team, and perhaps also from Carla and Nicholas and their team.
And
Anyone else?
we have a very enthusiastic engineering student from SUNY New Paltz who is in the back. Kevin Harges, here with his business cards.
Yeah,
Excellent.
my name is Kevin. I've actually worked for Pat for,
You want to?
yeah, no.
Yes,
What do you
they're on
got
the
here?
webinar. Good.
Where should I stand?
Yeah, just right where the red mouse is good.
Yeah, so I've worked with Pat for over a year now, so I've done a lot of the stuff that she has presented on, like the field inventory. I did actually town Ulster, about 300 lights. If you were one of the 10 communities that sent in your inventory, I actually did the work on that, then you got it back. So I'm looking to get more into like doing field inventories, helping communities out to do this work. If you want to see me afterwards, I have a card I can give you, you can email me. So
Right, amen.
yeah, I just want to help.
Thank you.
He's a good fellow.
Yeah.
All right,
So,
thanks.
so the free services provided through the consortium,
Yes.
though, are the workbook,
Yes,
the guidance,
and training.
and training.
Yep.
Right. There is also going to be additional support provided to all the consortium members via webinar or additional meetings, details, additional support regarding streetlight design, et cetera, as you actually get your hands into that process. So the community managed RFP.
There's 3 of them in the room.
Yeah.
I only see the one, but we have 2 others floating around, I hope, because they were here on the desk.
Yeah.
But no matter, I believe I emailed it to you. And at the risk of sounding like a broken record, it's on our website.
Right. And this is something that we know has been long awaited. There have been multiple levels of review of this document. A lot of people have put in a lot of effort to try and ensure that it is going to provide a good streamlined process. So at this point, the next steps in terms of participating in the aggregated community managed procurement process include by November 15th, committing to being named as a participant in the RFP document. And that means providing either a municipal resolution or a letter from your chief elected official indicating that you would like to be included in that fashion. At the same time, you need to ensure that you've provided your streetlight inventory to the consortium. And the reason for that is the inventories from all the participating municipalities are going to become part of this document. They're going to be attached as appendices, so we need that. Of course, you need to ensure that your municipal attorney has reviewed the document. And one issue regarding that is if there are any specific requirements within your municipality to participation or any additional services that are kind of straightforward but that aren't mentioned here that your municipality requires, that can also be attached to the RFP as sort of an addendum for your municipality. So you need to make sure that this reflects your requirements. If your municipality has not passed a best value local law, that's something that you need to do to participate in this process. This is a best value RFP rather than the vendor just being selected on the basis of price. There's a more complex set of considerations that will go into selecting the vendor. And so you have to ensure that your municipality is able to participate in that form of a procurement process. Of the folks in the room, who knows if their municipality has actually done this?
We have.
Okay, right. Do you want to talk about why Red Hook, the town of Red Hook, made the decision to do that? Were you part of that decision to adopt that local law at the time that you did?
Well, it's pretty simple because, you know, being a local municipality, we're often forced to take low bid, but with projects like this, service is really critical to the project. So your service requirements really dictate that you'll need to have a best value law passed for your community. So you have the response times that your public is willing to accept, and you know, you'll have greater flexibility in choosing the proper vendor for your needs. So yeah, pretty simple.
Great.
I'll just give you a real simple explanation. In the town of Ulster, we have 2 blacktop plants. The low bidder was the furthest one away. So when they were blacktopping on the other side of town, because they saved on the travel time across town, we had under our best value policy the right to go to the closest blacktop plant.
Right. So that's a good example of how having that local law enabled provides you a lot of flexibility in terms of procurement in general, far beyond just this particular aggregated procurement effort.
We have a sample.
We have numerous samples. We have Rosendale, we have Town of Ulster, we have Ulster County. Yeah. So we're all
If
available.
anyone needs us to look at a sample.
Right. In addition, you need to designate a representative who's going to participate in the bidder selection process.
It may have been a slight delay, but Jeff Allison over in Bethel is asking for a definition, you can see his question there, of a best value law. Who wants to tackle that?
Do you want to discuss it since Rosendale has done
I'm
it?
trying to remember it, because it was like 4 years ago, or, but actually, you might remember, but essentially, so, state procurement regulations require that you go with the lowest responsible bid price. And, change was, or, when was this done? It wasn't done that long ago, I
That was
don't
about
think.
4 years ago.
4 years ago. I know we adopted it right away, but they acknowledged that this presented some problems because the lowest bid is not necessarily going to work out to be the most economic, most efficient, especially think about energy, things that use energy. You know, you could buy a dump truck that was a real cheap price, but if it's like completely, if it's like terrible on fuel efficiency compared to another truck, it's gonna cost you more. So, so the state comptroller's office enabled communities to adopt by local law, because you have to set your own procurement policy at the municipal level, that's required. But you can adopt by local law best value language that allows you to procure using best value criteria. And if you Google state comptroller best value, that you'll get guidance on that. There's like a fact sheet on what that is and what that means. But as was said, it essentially provides you with more and much needed flexibility in procurement.
And at the same time, even under best value, you're supposed to make your choice according to criteria that are clearly defined in the procurement process. It doesn't limit it to the price. And then you'll have 1 year from the date that, is it from the date that the first contract is executed or the date that the bidder is selected?
I think
To
it's
actually
the
enter
due
into a
date of the
contract.
RFP, the date that the RFP is
Okay.
received, the proposals are received.
Oh, I thought it was the
Okay.
date the contractor was selected.
It
Well,
may be,
those will happen pretty close to each other, so
Yeah.
essentially you have
Within a
about,
few weeks,
a year to actually enter into a contract with the selected bidder if you decide to do that, to go ahead once.
we have communities though that enter into these contracts, subject to availability of funds and subject to execution of the license and purchase and sale agreements. So, they entered into the contract, but because of the subject language, they didn't really have to do anything.
Right. So the goal is to provide municipalities with sufficient flexibility given how many different moving parts there are for everybody. We covered that.
Yeah. I think one thing that George would like us to touch on, let me just go back for a second, is that you are looking, what's wonderful about the communities is that we have multiple people involved from different strata of the municipalities, so we typically are dealing with an elected official, but also with some volunteers. And I think what George is asking is that one representative be designated per municipality to work with us on bidder selection. Do you want to say something about that?
Let's back up for a second. The first thing we're going to do is have a pre-bid conference. We're going to require anybody that submits a proposal attend the pre-bid conference. And at that time, they will get a full briefing on the RFP and what our expectations are. In Rhode Island, we went out with the first RFP and the prices we got back were crazy. So we said, okay, we need to talk to these folks and try this again. So we did. We had a pre-bid conference that we made mandatory. And once the contractors understood that a guy can do 25 a day and so on and so forth, the numbers we got the second round were much better. Okay? So we're going to want to have a mandatory pre-bid conference to educate the bidders ahead of time in hopes of shortening the overall process. The next thing is you will have an evaluation sheet, which will include all the due diligence, how you evaluate the proposals, how you use the price, what the value of the price is relative to the selection process. And the team, where we get one representative from each community, will be involved in checking references and, you know, doing all of that to put together the final recommendation for award. Okay. Now, the other part about best value in this case is, remember what we said earlier, you're going to have an insurance policy that indemnifies the utility. You go out and hire a lousy contractor that drops mast arms on cars or damages the utility's equipment, you're going to get involved in problems. And the other thing is I'm an old DPW, and I will tell you this. When Mrs. Smith looks out her window and she sees a truck out there working on that light, and it's some guy in a ragtag, ratty shirt with a truck that looks like it won't make it to the end of the block, that's how he's going to judge the fact that the town is now managing their streetlights. It'll have nothing to do with the quality of the work that the guy's doing. It'll be about what she sees. And so one of the things that I found that's important is you've got to understand what the public, how the public is going to perceive what you're doing. So you can have the best lights in the world, but they'll still judge you poorly if you don't be careful about the quality of the workers that you hire to do this work and the image that they present and how they interact with your public. So that's why best value is so important to this.
Right. And that's all detailed in the RFP, what the criteria are, how each of those criteria are weighted, etc. So
When do we anticipate having that pre-bid conference?
Early November.
Great.
Would we want to wait until we know who all the municipalities
You
are
might need to
participating?
wait until November
Yeah,
15th.
yeah, because that's going to be a more compelling opportunity.
Yeah, you have to do it after, yeah, it's when this is put out.
Yeah.
Normally, these are put out, they're put onto the state list of bids and that sort of thing. And then there would be an announcement there that said there'd be a mandatory pre-bid conference.
Yeah.
And then at least 2 weeks after the pre-bid conference, the bids would be due.
Right. So it's going to be the end of November, probably,
Probably.
or December 1st, if municipalities have to respond by November 15th.
We have to do it, you know,
Yeah.
before it gets too late, because
Yeah.
I live in North Carolina now, and I got rid of all my winter clothes.
And I have to say, we have a few contacts who would have liked today to be
Yeah.
a pre-bid conference.
Right.
And we've endeavored mightily to have separate communications with you all than from people who would like to be your bidders. There's a lot of interest in this out there, but we've really been keeping them at arm's length, because we'll hear from them soon enough. So now, I don't have a ton more slides or anything. We had a request, I got a request at break time to do a round robin to get status on where people are at. So that, to see that if there's opportunities to help each other, collaborate, you know, on different stages you might be at or something of that nature. Does that sound good?
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. All right, well, not to pick on Rhinebeck, but picking on Rhinebeck.
Okay, I'm Richard Lewitt, Village of Rhinebeck. We basically have looked at our bill from Central Hudson.
That's actually been
Good
part of the
and we've contacted Computel, and we'll be arranging for them to come down and do their part of the audit.
Okay.
Town of Rhinebeck, and he's way ahead of me. Yeah, looked at your bill, right? I have looked at the bill, that's the other part.
I'm Village of Red Hook, here with the mayor, Blundell, over there. So he actually has a better idea of where we're at in the schedule.
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, we've sent Jen our billing information, and they developed this unbelievable spreadsheet. I don't know if it came from this fellow, but it's showed us our projected savings. And we've shown that to our board, and just the savings alone are amazing. And we've been committed to LED lights before Central Hudson got the tariff approval and so forth. Before we wanted to do it, now it helps us. We've looked at the 60-page RFP, so to speak.
Okay.
I rounded up to 60 with all the
Yeah.
attachments and addendums, but
Yeah.
so I think we'll do that. We have sent in we've taken the Central Hudson building sheet with all the pole locations, and that's been converted to a spreadsheet. And so we can do the next step of audit, but we have been through Computel and a few things like that in the past. we feel pretty good with their list, but I think at our next meeting, we'll do a resolution or letter to get ourselves into the RFP and.
Well, it sounds like we need to pass a resolution on the best value law.
Yeah, I just sitting here, I emailed our village attorney saying, how fast can we do that? Because we have a public hearing, certain things we have to go through to change the local law.
Right. This is a bit much to recap, but, let's see, so we do have a question here. Can you quickly, oh no, we already answered that. So we've just heard from the town and village of Red Hook and Rhinebeck, recapping.
Not the town yet.
Oh, not the town, I'm sorry.
I'm with the Tustin Energy Committee with the town of Tustin in Narrowsburg, New York, Sullivan County. And we've had Computel come in and do an inventory of our lights. We have not had an audit as far as the actual condition of the lights and the wattage and all that. But we are moving ahead with that with the help of Nicholas Moran here, who's been amazingly helpful. And we're hoping to start working on getting our streetlights switched over from whatever mess they are now to an LED with a purchased armature that would be owned by the town.
Good, okay, who else? Town of Ulster's in the house.
We have a series of streetlights that are behind a meter on a public street, which have already been converted to LEDs about 4 years ago. We are in the process of converting all town-owned lights that are on town-owned property to LEDs. We've completed the inventory. I'm still looking for that one light that you can't find. And we're waiting for the RFP to the process to get put together so that we can, there's several things, we have 7 lighting districts. So we're debating whether we split the lighting districts up and take them in smaller groups. The other thing is that given our location, we have a series of lights that were installed by NISDOT as part of the New York State Thruway or part of Route 28 or part of Route 32. And we're in the process of going to NISDOT to make sure that they know that since we're responsible for them, we're going to be changing out the fixtures so that after we do it, they don't come back to us and say, that was a 250 watt, you've now done that, we've got complaints and you got to replace them all. We don't want that.
Sure.
So we're trying to get them off, to buy off early. There's also complicated because of the county of Ulster has an agreement with NISDOT where they're supposed to be paying for it, but 30 years ago the town of Ulster got stuck with the bill and we haven't been able to get rid of it. So we got to get the county to buy off also.
Just, so gentlemen, just a quick note on something you said. You were thinking of doing, perhaps phasing the conversion or the purchase and the conversion?
Phasing the project, and the project to me would be the purchase and the conversion. Now, if it turns out that, as we discussed, that there's going to be a revision in the tariff because of the stranded costs, and it's going to go from $117 a fixture up, we could elect to accelerate that portion, bank those districts, and then do the conversion later on.
Right, so, yeah, a couple of things to note. One is that there are, if you're purchasing your system, you have to purchase, I think with Central Hudson, a minimum of 125 lights. So I don't know how small your lighting districts are, but that's just something to keep in mind, that you can't purchase little amounts. Like we have districts with 20 lights. The other thing is really, you know, as you saw on the spreadsheet, I said the paybacks are so huge. I mean, all right, so Central Hudson raised its purchase price from $234 per light, and that includes the arm and the fixture, to $303 per light. But it did not have that big an impact on the payback. But you know, it was still, we had said, you know, 3 to 4, it was still 3 to 4. It was like maybe added 6 months at most. So it doesn't really make that much of a difference. The savings from taking over the street lights is so enormous that you're really losing money by breaking it into sections. Just, you know, it's Just
And from a financing approach,
from a
you can
fin-
choose the term, you can choose a term that's extended a little bit beyond what the payback would be, so that you're actually.
We've
having
already made decisions
positive-
to self-finance everything. That's all
Got
we
it.
do now.
Okay.
What do you do if you don't have 125 lights? Was that the number for buying from Central
Well,
Hudson?
if you don't have that many lights, that's okay. You can, that's just, what they're trying to prevent is from a community that has 1,000 lights buying 20 lights at a time. So if you have 60 lights or whatever, or 10 lights, you can buy them all at once. But they just don't want you segmenting that purchase because it's a process.
I just did a tally. We're actively working today and, over time with 14 communities are represented here or on the webinar, or, they just weren't able to dial in today. But so we're a good group. And some are at the beginning of the process. I was delighted to hear from the town of Hurley over the weekend, which is just getting started, but, they're very enthusiastic. They've been reading all the emails. So they finally turned it over to their environmental committee and said, go do that. Yes.
Can I, just during the break, I was discussing with, we were having a little discussion about if you have a municipal solar project, in the past, you could not remote net meter to your streetlights, which was kind of a bummer. You couldn't, because that's such a big chunk of municipal electricity costs. But the Public Service Commission just ruled in August that communities can remote net meter unmetered street lighting. So that can change potentially the economics of your solar project.
I'm just going to repeat that for our audience. So the Public Service Commission ruled in August, reversing a previous decision that.
It's not, the utilities just wouldn't do it because it was unmetered. So the Public Service Commission, it was in response to a petition by a solar company saying that, that lights, all electricity use should be able to be covered by a municipal solar project.
So you can remote net meter to your street lights using solar.
And that's very important and advantageous because at least in Con Ed service territory, and I think this is true in NYSEG as well, the street light rate is so much higher than the electricity rate paid for, metered service by municipalities. So it actually is, at least in Con Ed service territory, it's potentially a game changer in terms of the economics of municipal solar.
I'd ask those in Central Hudson to take a good close look at the rate you're paying on your streetlight bills and compare it to what's on your general bill.
Yes.
Yeah,
Start.
Jen, did you say that you would be able to send us that case? Because that definitely applies to town of Tustin. We had a whole big brouhaha about this remote net metering, and because our lights weren't metered, we couldn't use it. So this is gonna be a sea change for us if that is actually.
So I'm gonna send it to Pat, and Pat will send it to everyone.
Sounds good. Thank you.
So just a quick question on the 18 communities that are
Yeah.
there. Do you have an aggregate number of lights?
Well, of course, that would be good, right there, but, no, I don't.
Okay.
I mean, these are
And
small
then
communities.
the
That's what everybody has in common. We're seeing that the early, strong interest is from small communities, with the exception of the wonderful city of Kingston, which has been with us right from the start, and they're patiently waiting for us to get the turnkey RFP going. But in the meantime, I don't think it's a state secret. They're enjoying a light bill that is $30,000 less than they had been paying when they were renters. So they have purchased their streetlights and they have not yet converted, and they're saving $30,000 a month.
So the geographical region that's covered by these 18 communities and the relationship to the potential respondents to an RFP, would it be a contractor? Would it be multiple contractors? What's our objective from this? What's the power here in terms of this,
George
being
has
able
a
to-
thought.
One contract.
one contractor, and the geographic region that they would cover
Doesn't
is
matter.
currently,
Doesn't matter.
doesn't matter. Okay. Even with a 4-hour response time for emergency or 24-hour response time, I mean, none of that is going to be a mitigating factor.
I'm more concerned with getting your lights converted, because once they're converted, the frequency of that is going to be extremely small. And that can be an issue.
But George, I think we accounted for that in the RFP, allowing for subcontracting for
Yes.
maintenance services. So they could subcontract out to local electrical companies.
We have friends from the North Country and from the Mohawk Valley listening in, or at least they were. We wouldn't begrudge them if they had wandered away. But, oh dear, George, where did you go? He just took a fall or something. So, well, this is perhaps the time to talk about piggybacking. Did we discuss piggybacking? Not really.
No, we haven't talked about piggybacking, but, so I can talk about part of that, and then George will need to chime in as well. So in addition to the municipalities that have indicated they're interested in being named as participants in the RFP, we are including a provision that will enable other munis that are not listed to piggyback on a contract that's executed through this RFP. And this is something that's been done in Westchester County with regard to streetlight procurement, and lots of municipalities have taken advantage of that opportunity to piggyback on contracts let by, in this case it was the city of New Rochelle in Westchester. And so even if the aggregate number of streetlights represented by the munis that are named as participants isn't a huge number, we will be communicating to the contractors that there is a significantly larger opportunity available through munis that are likely to piggyback. And that's something that contractors in this field are very much aware of, I think, based on the experience in Westchester. In Westchester, in the end, it was close. It was maybe an additional 18 or so municipalities that piggybacked on that contract. So it became a huge opportunity for the winning vendor.
Let me make sure I understand. Does that mean, for example, if you meet your November 15th target, but I've gone to sleep for 4 months, that in January or something, I can come to you and say, we're ready to be part of the project?
You can't come to us necessarily, so that there's certain services that are going to be provided to and really focused on the participants in this. A lot of the hand-holding associated with the inventory services, with the streetlight design services, et cetera, that more individual and concentrated attention is going to be limited to participants.
For the first group?
To the first group who are named in the RFP. There will be plenty of resources available to munis that come later, the webinars that have been recorded, the guides that have been created, but it won't be the same more intensive support that the named munis receive.
But assuming a late arriving municipality can meet that challenge, it will be able to become part of the larger project along with...
It will be able to take advantage of the procurement activities and to piggyback on a contract that one of the participants enters into with the selected vendor.
But that's just to be clear, that's just for the installation of the lights and follow-on services. So, and that's what distinguishes a community-managed approach from a turnkey approach. You're going to be procuring your lights. That's separately. So this aggregated RFP we're talking about is just the services from a contractor for doing the installation and the follow-on maintenance. And if you're piggybacking like really far into the future, you just want to make sure.
And that's limited to 1 year anyway.
Oh, it's limited to a year, okay.
Opportunity, yeah.
Speaking of turnkey, we have a question from Jeff Allison in Bethel. I think I know the answer, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, Nina, but here we go. Bethel has passed a resolution to be a participating town in either the community managed or turnkey RFP. Can we be involved with both and then make a decision later when we understand the costs and can make a decision that we could afford the turnkey option?
So this is something that I think we need to discuss within the consortium. It would be to the detriment of the effort if all the municipalities participated in both. Because the vendors would look at those lists and not have a sense of what the size of the opportunity.
Well,
Right.
and who's really committed to what, you know, so the point is for them to look at that, see a list of municipalities and say, oh, well, I'm going to get all of this business.
Not guaranteed.
Well, it's not guaranteed, but they have a stronger sense that they'll get that if you're not trying to do multiple.
Correct.
You know,
So,
approaches.
right. So I think it is important that municipalities understand what's involved with the community managed process. Is that something that you have the resources internally to handle in terms of understanding your audit, in terms of thinking through the design? You know, with a lot of support from the consortium, with support from the Hudson Valley Regional Council and other services.
Well, and I think it's important to say for our newcomers, I keep thinking about, you know, the new people I've been speaking with, is that the way we got to the split approach is that we understood that there's a strong drive to save the most amount of money possible on the part of small communities. So, you know, the innovative idea that George brought to us in state was that he said, well, I'll just show you how to do it absolutely for barest bones cost. And that's what this is all about. Many, many providers are driving the highways and byways to talk to all of you about a turnkey approach. Although the New York Power Authority has typically not been willing to do turnkey with a community with fewer than 400 lights.
So I just wanted, we haven't really talked about like the various responsibilities that are involved in a community managed approach versus a turnkey approach. And so I have made up a little list at one point for Central Hudson. I'm sure I'm forgetting things, but you know, with a turnkey approach, of course, you just get a contractor and they manage the whole project, and it's, you know, you can participate to the extent that you want to, but you can also be totally hands off. So when it's a community managed approach, you're going to be, you know, responsible for figuring out which fixtures to purchase, right? There's not just one type of LED light. You got to make a choice of what kind of fixture to purchase. Is it going to be Cree? Is it going to be Philips? Is it going to be, you know? So those are a decision you're going to have to make.
And there'll be a lot of support.
There will be a lot of support from this gentleman here in this process. But for those that are not, again, for those that are not participating as participants, a community managed approach down the road might be a little more challenging for you. You'd have to put more, you'd have to have people in your municipality that can work on this and that can maybe have some technical expertise or know where to find it. Some town consultants, you know, planning board consultants, town engineers, some of these firms do have lighting expertise as part of their suite of services that they offer. So, you know, it might be the case that you could draw on that existing expertise. But so you're going to be responsible for procurement, separate from procuring the installation and follow-on maintenance services. And then, you know, there are things you have to do. When you get your operating agreement, I had alluded to, you have to fill out an application with, you know, with the utility for the conversion. So someone in your municipality is going to have to do that process of filling that out and getting it to the utility. And there are a number of things that the utility requires in your agreement that you can make your contractor responsible for. So, you know, you don't have to feel like you have to do everything, but you have to build those things into your contract. So, for instance, you could have, you know, you're going to have some number for your public to call if a light goes out, right? And it doesn't really happen that much with LEDs, but eventually it will, you know, way down the road. So, you can have your contractor handle those calls directly, or else just funnel them to the contractor, and then they'll give you reports, annual reports of the calls and that kind of thing.
And that's all spelled out of the RFP.
This is
that the
all in the
contractor has to provide
right.
those services.
This is on the RFP, but you're going to have to do some minimal work. You're in charge of it. Although in a turnkey approach, you're in charge of it once you take ownership of the lights and they've been converted. There are not a ton of steps. There's just you have to read your operating agreement and make sure you've done everything you're supposed to do. Call your insurance company and get the get the appropriate insurance. Like, these steps have to be done.
Okay, let's see if we have another question. No, I think we answered that question. Anything else? And is there a muni we haven't heard from? Anybody?
Well, the town of Red Hook didn't chime in, but we could quickly, we have, the stage we are at the moment is we've agreed to purchase the lights, so we'll be signing our contract actually next week. We've approved the financing for both the general accounts and our lighting districts. And we should be finished with some tweaks to the RFP by midweek of next week.
How are you financing it?
We're actually going to go out and bond for it. Yeah.
Like a ban or
No, I think we're going to bond for it. Yeah. Yeah. So we did a permissive resolution.
How much is the project?
You're going to test my memory, of course. Well, there's 3 different accounts for us. So.
About 300 lights, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or is that including the village?
Well, we've got 80, 81. Yeah, it's 309 is the total.
309.
Here, you want me to tell you?
We just happen to have your inventory.
She's got the numbers right there.
Have you looked into the possibility of a tax exempt municipal lease? Is that something?
Our
that you
attorney
consider?
does not like those.
Why not?
Well, that's a longer conversation than we'll have today, but she's not a big fan of those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Well, you've made a lot of progress.
Yeah.
You're well on your way.
Yeah, we're ready, willing, and eager.
That's
One note I wanted to
I
add.
can't imagine bonding for $100,000. It just doesn't make sense.
Well, we have local banks that we can call, and our transaction costs are minimal
Okay.
for that financing. So we're not going out to the public market.
Got it.
Yeah. And just one note on piggy banking. You just need to be sure if you're going to piggy bank, for example, if the town of Red Hook were to be the lead municipality, make sure that if you want to piggyback on it, that we meet your procurement policies. Then you don't have to do essentially hardly anything, but you just need to double check and make sure that we're satisfying your municipality's needs.
And you still have to pass the best value local law.
Right.
Since this contract will be let under that process.
Right.
Your municipality has to have enabled that. Great.
All right, I think we're winding down as far as questions go. But you have our contact information, and you have the website, nystreetlights.org. And everyone who attended either by webinar or in person will get the slides, the video, and the WebEx video, such as it is, with our little heads. And we're going to be around for a while, just putting things away. So if you have any specific questions, you can buttonhole us.
I'll put things away.
Yeah, so thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you all.